Hey guys, today we begin with a slow trip back to the deep past. Long before the first dinosaur appeared, we'll meet giant sea bugs, dragonflies as wide as your arm, and the tiny fish that first grew jaws. These early creatures show how life kept changing and set the stage for the giants that followed. But before you get comfortable, please make sure to like the video and subscribe if you genuinely appreciate the work I do here. And please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, put your phone or TV remote out of reach, and let's move into tonight's journey together. 3 billion years ago, the world held its breath in waiting. No wings cut through skies, no fins parted waters. The continents lay barren and windswept, while the shallow seas harbored the first whispers of what we might call life. In the quiet tidal flats, where sunlight dappled across warm primordial waters, microscopic architects were building the foundations of our world. They worked without hands, without eyes, without awareness, yet with perfect patience. These were the cyanobacteria, invisible to any naked eye that wouldn't exist for eons. Day after day, tide after tide, grain by tiny grain, these bacterial colonies secreted sticky films that trapped sediment from the water. Layer upon delicate layer, they built living structures, stromatolites, the stone pillows that rose like miniature mountains from the ancient seafloor. Each millimeter might represent a century of growth, each centimeter a millennium of quiet, persistent existence. If we could stand there, in those shallow waters, the air would burn our lungs, the ultraviolet radiation would sear our skin, but the cyanobacteria, they thrived. Within their microscopic cells, a revolution was unfolding, one that would rewrite the chemistry of our planet, photosynthesis. These tiny cells had learned a trick that would change everything. They captured sunlight and, with quiet determination, split water molecules to access their hydrogen. The oxygen, that waste product, that poison to the world as it existed then, bubbled away molecule by molecule into seas and eventually into skies. This was not the dramatic gasping of lungs, but rather the planet's first slow, hesitant exhalation. For hundreds of millions of years, oxygen was absorbed by iron in the oceans, creating vast rust deposits that would someday become the banded iron formations we mine today. When the seas could hold no more, oxygen began to build in the atmosphere, invisibly, imperceptibly, breath by microscopic breath. These stromatolites were terraforming Earth. The oxygen they produced was initially toxic to most life that existed. This was perhaps the first mass extinction, a quiet apocalypse where the waste product of one organism became the poison of another. Yet it was also the necessary foundation for everything that would follow. Without this oxygen revolution, there would be no animals, no forests, no flight, no thought. In the warm shallows of Shark Bay, Australia, their descendants still grow today. Modern stromatolites rise from the hypersaline waters like living fossils, built by the same patient process that shaped our world billions of years ago. They grow at the same imperceptible pace, perhaps a half millimeter per year. Stand beside them, and you stand beside time itself, a living window into Earth's infancy. Touch one of these living stones and your fingertip connects with a lineage older than continents, older than multicellular life, older than sex or seeds or shells or scales. These were Earth's first creatures. Though they had no hearts, no brains, no eyes with which to see the world, they were so fundamentally changing. What makes the story of stromatolites so compelling is not their complexity, but their simplicity. Before the elaborate dance of predator and prey, before the anxious pulse of a heart or the curious gaze of an eye, there was this light captured by membrane, carbon fixed into sugar, oxygen released as waste. The simplest of metabolic equations became the foundation for the most complex forms of life. As the eons passed, oxygen levels rose, and the first gentle currents of evolutionary possibility began to stir. Something new was becoming possible in Earth's waters. The stage was being set, molecule by molecule, for more complex forms to emerge. But those forms would wait, suspended in potential, for another billion years of bacterial patience. The cyanobacteria kept building their stone gardens, indifferent to the passage of time, unaware that they were the authors of Earth's most profound transformation. In their quiet way, they had written the first chapter in the story of life, a story that would eventually include us, looking back across the vastness of time, marveling at how something so small could change something so large. 600 million years ago, in waters now rendered to stone beneath the Australian outback, something unprecedented stirred across the seafloor. Life had grown restless with simplicity. After 3 billion years of microbial monotony, the Ediacaran seas witnessed an experiment in complexity that remains enigmatic even today. Imagine yourself drifting above that ancient seafloor. The water is cool and clear, filtered by eons of microbial processing. Below, a quilt of life spreads across bacterial mats like frost patterns on winter glass. These are not plants, not animals as we understand them, but something else, something beautifully in between. Dickinsonia rests upon the seafloor, a soft oval being segmented like a fingerprint, absorbing nutrients through its underside. No mouth, no gut, no sense organs we can recognize. Some specimens reached nearly a meter across, yet were paper thin, their entire bodies exchanging gases directly with the water. They glide imperceptibly across bacterial mats, feeding through direct absorption, leaving ghostly traces of their passage. Feeding traces now preserved as fossils that tell us here was intention, here was movement, here was hunger. Nearby sways Charniodiscus, anchored to the seafloor but reaching upward with delicate fronds that ripple in the current. Its fractal branches maximize surface area, drawing dissolved nutrients from the water in a manner reminiscent of modern sea pens, yet fundamentally different. Without muscles, without nerves, as we know them, they nonetheless respond to the ocean's gentle rhythms. Perhaps most beguiling is Sprigina, whose quilted, segmented body bears what appears to be a distinct head, a first step toward the cephalization that would later define animal evolution. Its feather-shaped form, barely 10 centimeters long, hints at bilateral symmetry, that critical innovation that would eventually lead to the body plan of most animals, including ourselves. These creatures inhabited a world without predation as we understand it today. They had no hard parts, no shells, no teeth, no claws. They had no need for them. Their world was one of soft bodies and gentle feeding, of absorption and diffusion, of living atop bacterial mats like royalty upon cushioned thrones. This was life without the anxious pulse of a hunted heart, without the desperate scramble of prey or the focused pursuit of predator. The Ediacaran biota lived in a kind of biological Eden, before the evolutionary fall into the more brutal dynamics that would follow. They grew large because they could, exposed because nothing hunted them, vulnerable because there was no advantage yet in armor. When you hold a jellyfish in your hands today, something I don't recommend, you're cradling a distant echo of this time. The gelatinous body, the radial symmetry, the passive feeding, these are ghosts of the Ediacaran strategy. But even jellyfish have stinging cells, have muscles, have neural nets, refinements that the Ediacaran biota largely lacked. The fossils of these beings are not bones or shells, but impressions, as if a soft body pressed into sand and then was lifted away, leaving only its outline. They appear to us as shadows, negative spaces in the rock. We must infer their existence from their absence, from the gentle depressions they left behind, like trying to understand a person from the indent they leave in a mattress after rising. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Ediacaran biota is their disappearance. As the Cambrian dawn broke and the first armored creatures emerged, these soft experiments in life began to vanish. Whether outcompeted, consumed, or simply rendered obsolete by changing environmental conditions, they faded from Earth's story, leaving only their impressions in stone. Some paleontologists believe certain Ediacaran forms may have survived as modern groups. Perhaps the ancestors of jellyfish, corals, or sponges lie among them. Others suggest they represent a failed experiment, a distinctive kingdom of life that flourished briefly and then disappeared entirely, biology's equivalent of Neanderthals, but far more alien. What makes them so difficult to classify is their fundamental difference. They operated by rules we struggle to understand, built bodies along lines abandoned by later evolution. They are not our direct ancestors, but rather our distant cousins, branches of life's tree that grew briefly toward the light before being overshadowed. As we study their fossil impressions in Australia's Ediacara Hills, in Russia's White Sea coast, in England's Charnwood Forest, we're left with more questions than answers. Were they truly animals? Were they something else entirely? Did they have cells like ours? Did they reproduce sexually? Did they possess any form of awareness? The rock keeps most of its secrets. But one thing is certain. For a brief window in Earth's history, these soft-bodied dreamers dominated the sea floor, exploring the possibilities of multicellular life before the frenetic diversification that would follow. They were life's first tentative sketch of complexity, drawn gently on the canvas of bacterial mats that had ruled for billions of years prior. As the Ediacaran period drew to a close, around 541 million years ago, something was stirring in Earth's oceans. The rules were about to change. The gentle quilt of Ediacaran life would soon give way to something far more dynamic, far more dangerous, and far more diverse. The stage was set for one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of life on Earth. The curtain rises on the Cambrian period, and suddenly, by geological standards at least, the quiet, dreamy seas of the Ediacaran give way to an explosion of form and function. The opening act of animal life bursts onto Earth's stage with a diversity that remains astonishing 500 million years later. If we could slip beneath those ancient waters, we would hardly recognize the world that had emerged. The soft, passive Ediacaran forms had largely vanished, replaced by creatures with hard parts, with defined anatomies, with purpose and motion, and, perhaps most revolutionary of all, with the ability to see. Light filters down through the shallow waters of what will someday become the Canadian Rockies, illuminating a seascape teeming with experiment and innovation. Here, in the Burgess Shale, life's possibilities unfold in real time. Creatures with 5 eyes, with 7-part mouths, with backward-facing heads, with too many legs or not enough, all testing the boundaries of what a body can be. And above this evolutionary laboratory glides the uncontested ruler of the Cambrian seas, Anomalocaris, the strange shrimp that was neither strange nor shrimp, but something far more formidable. Reaching lengths of nearly a meter, a leviathan by early Cambrian standards, Anomalocaris propels itself with the undulating motion of the lateral lobes that line its body, like a stingray's graceful wings. Its most striking features announce its predatory nature. At its front, a pair of jointed, barbed appendages, initially mistaken by paleontologists for separate shrimp-like creatures, reach forward to grasp prey. Below them, a circular mouth ringed with serrated plates opens and closes like a terrible camera aperture, perfect for cracking the newly evolved shells of trilobites and other armored prey. But perhaps most remarkable are its eyes, compound organs mounted on stalks, each containing up to 16 individual lenses. These were among the first complex visual systems on our planet, capable of forming images, detecting movement, perceiving depth. For the first time in Earth's history, a creature could look out at the world and truly see it. Imagine the advantage this granted. While most life still navigated by chemical cues and touch, Anomalocaris could spot prey from a distance, could track movement, could hunt with precision. It was as if one chess player could suddenly see the board, while all others played blindfolded. Below this apex predator, the seafloor teems with trilobites, the armored arthropods whose segmented bodies would become one of the most successful designs in evolutionary history. They scuttle across the sediment, their multiple legs working in wave-like synchrony, their hard carapaces providing some protection against the hunters above. The Cambrian waters pulse with a new biological dynamic, predator and prey, arms race and adaptation, eat or be eaten. This was the dawn of ecological complexity, where interactions between organisms became as important as interactions with the environment. What drove this sudden flourishing of form? What lit the fuse of the Cambrian explosion? Scientists continue to debate the triggers, but several factors aligned to make this evolutionary acceleration possible. Oxygen levels had finally reached a threshold that could support energetic, metabolically demanding lifestyles. The molecular toolkit for building complex bodies, Hox genes that specify body segments, genes for neural development, for muscle formation, for mineral-based hard parts, had evolved during the long microbial and Ediacaran preludes, waiting like loaded springs for release. Perhaps most importantly, the rules of life had fundamentally changed. Once the first predators evolved, everything else had to adapt or perish. Hard shells, burrowing behaviors, enhanced mobility, better sensory systems, all became necessary innovations in a world where, for the first time, another organism might want to eat you. This was not a gradual shift but an evolutionary cascade. Each innovation triggered the need for counter-innovations. Shells led to shell-cracking jaws. Faster swimming led to better eyes and grasping appendages. Burrowing led to creatures specialized to dig prey from their hiding places. The evolutionary pace accelerated from the languid drifting of the Ediacaran to something approaching urgency. Within a mere 20 million years, a blink in geological time, nearly all the major animal body plans that exist today had appeared. Ancestors of mollusks, arthropods, chordates, echinoderms, and more made their debut, establishing the fundamental architectural schemes upon which 500 million years of subsequent evolution would build. Yet many Cambrian creatures fall into no modern category. Consider Opabinia, with its 5 eyes and front-facing proboscis tipped with grasping spines. Or Wiwaxia, covered in overlapping scales and protruding spines like a mobile pincushion. Or Nectocaris, with features suggesting relationships to modern squids, yet existing long before squids should have evolved. These were not failed experiments but successful innovations, creatures perfectly adapted to their moment in Earth's history. That they left no direct descendants doesn't diminish their evolutionary significance. They were branches of life's tree that flourished for millions of years before being pruned by time and changing circumstances. The Cambrian was biology's Big Bang, a period of creative experimentation when the boundaries of what life could be were tested and expanded. After 3 billion years of microbial simplicity and the gentle Ediacaran prelude, life had finally found its rhythm and tempo. The evolutionary dawn chorus had begun after a long, quiet night. And while many of its players would eventually exit the stage, the fundamental patterns established during this great opening act, predation, defense, sensory awareness, mobility, competitive advantage, would define animal life for all time to come, echoing forward through the ages to shape the dynamics of every ecosystem, including our own. In the warm, shallow seas of the Middle Cambrian, approximately 508 million years ago, life continued its grand experiment in form and function. Among the trilobites and predatory anomalocarids, a caste of smaller characters emerged whose body plans pushed the boundaries of biological possibility, creatures so bizarre that even after their fossils were discovered, scientists struggled for decades to make sense of them. Peer closely at the seafloor sediments, and you might spot something that appears, at first glance, like a walking cactus. This is Hallucigenia, perhaps the most aptly named creature in paleontological history. No larger than your pinky finger, this enigmatic animal perches on 7 pairs of stilted legs, while 7 tentacular spines project upward from its tubular body. For nearly a century after its discovery, paleontologists quite literally couldn't tell which end was which, or which side was up. The initial reconstructions of Hallucigenia placed it upside down, with the spines serving as awkward stilts, and the legs reimagined as waving tentacles along its back. Its head was mistakenly identified as its tail. Only in the 1990s did more complete specimens reveal the truth. Hallucigenia walked on flexible legs, ending in clawed feet, while the rigid spines likely served as protection against predators. A small, simple head bore 2 simple eyes and a ring-like mouth. This confusion wasn't mere scientific error. It reflected how truly alien these early body plans were, how far they stretched the boundaries of what we recognize as animal anatomy. Hallucigenia belonged to a group called lobopods, distant relatives of modern velvet worms, but its extreme specializations made this relationship difficult to discern. Nearby, the equally peculiar Opabinia navigated the water column. Its segmented body, unremarkable in itself, was fronted by perhaps the strangest head in evolutionary history. 5 circular eyes arranged in a row across the top, and projecting forward, a flexible proboscis ending in a grasping claw. This appendage, likely used to capture prey and pass it backward to the mouth, was jointed and could be curled beneath the body when not in use. When paleontologist Harry Whittington first presented his reconstruction of Opabinia at a scientific conference in 1972, the audience reportedly erupted in laughter, not mockery, but the surprised recognition that life's early experiments were far stranger than anyone had imagined. Crawling across the sediment was Wiwaxia, a creature that resembled nothing so much as an ambulatory pincushion. Its oval body was covered in overlapping scales arranged in rows, while 2 rows of long spines projected upward from its back. It possessed no eyes we can identify, no obvious head, and moved on a single flat muscular foot like a modern snail. Its mouth contained tooth-like structures suggesting it grazed on bacterial mats or soft-bodied prey. The relationship of these creatures to modern animal groups remains contested. Are they distant aunts and uncles to familiar lineages, or do they represent entirely separate branches on life's tree? Their soft bodies contained few of the preservable hard parts that would help definitively place them in our taxonomic systems. What we do know is that they thrived in the ecological niches created by the Cambrian explosion. They developed specialized feeding strategies, defense mechanisms, and locomotion methods that allowed them to navigate the increasingly complex web of predator-prey relationships. Hallucigenia's spines deterred would-be predators. Opabinia's grasping proboscis allowed it to snatch prey from hiding places or from the water column. Wiwaxia's armor of scales and spines provided protection while it grazed, perhaps at night when visual predators were at a disadvantage. These adaptations tell us something profound about the Cambrian environment. The peaceful Ediacaran garden had given way to a more dangerous world, where survival depended on specialized adaptations. The pressure of predation drove the evolution of defense. The challenge of finding food drove the evolution of novel feeding structures. Yet for all their strangeness, these creatures were not evolutionary dead ends. Modern genetic and developmental studies suggest that Hallucigenia may share a common ancestor with arthropods, the group that would go on to produce insects, spiders, crustaceans, and trilobites. Opabinia may belong near the base of the same lineage. Wiwaxia shares characteristics with both annelid worms and mollusks. They stand at the critical junctures of evolutionary history, illuminating the pathways by which familiar body plans emerged from unfamiliar beginnings. They remind us that evolution doesn't proceed in a straight line toward predetermined forms, but rather explores a landscape of possibilities, with successful innovations preserved and unsuccessful ones discarded. As the Cambrian period continued, these strange pioneers would largely disappear, replaced by creatures whose body plans fit more neatly into the categories we recognize today. But for tens of millions of years, they dominated the seafloor, testament to life's capacity for exploration and creativity, its willingness to test the boundaries of what a body can be and how it might function in the challenges of an ancient sea. The morning sun breaks over an Ordovician tideland, roughly 470 million years ago. As light penetrates the shallow waters, it illuminates a living carpet stretching toward the horizon, countless armored forms moving with deliberate purpose across the sea floor. These are the trilobites, the great success story of early animal evolution, their 3-lobed bodies gleaming with the calcite crystals of their protective exoskeletons. Unlike the experimental oddities of the Cambrian, trilobites represent a refined, almost perfected design. Their segmented bodies, divided lengthwise into 3 lobes, hence their name, and crosswise into a head shield, cephalon, a thorax of articulated segments, and a tail shield, pygidium, proved so successful that they would dominate marine ecosystems for over 270 million years, far longer than dinosaurs would later rule the land. Watch as a paradoxides, nearly 2 feet long, plows through the sediment. Its broad, flattened body bears dozens of walking legs, 1 pair per segment, that move in metachronal waves, creating the illusion of ripples passing from tail to head. Above each leg, feathery gills extract oxygen from the water. At its front, compound eyes mounted on the cephalon scan for danger, while antennae test the chemical composition of the water and sediment. Nearby, a smaller Phacops detected a threat. In a smooth, practiced motion, it rolls into a tight ball, using the precise fit between cephalon and pygidium to protect its vulnerable underside, a defensive strategy so effective that modern pillbugs, distant relatives of trilobites, still employ it today. Across the seafloor, hundreds of trilobites have left their old exoskeletons behind, molted carapaces drifting like parchment in the gentle currents. Trilobites, like modern arthropods, grew by periodically shedding their rigid armor and expanding before their new exoskeleton hardened. These molts, more common than actual trilobite bodies, account for much of the fossil record of these creatures. They tell stories of growth, of survival, of the quiet persistence of life adapting to its surroundings. The eyes of trilobites represent one of evolution's most remarkable innovations. Composed of calcite, the same mineral that forms their exoskeletons, these were the first mineralized visual organs in animal history. In species like Phacops, each eye contained up to 700 individual lenses arranged in a precise geometric pattern, each lens a perfect crystal oriented to minimize visual distortion. Some deep-water species developed eyes mounted on long stalks to better detect the faint glimmer of bioluminescent prey. Others, dwelling in the muddy depths beyond light's reach, lost their eyes entirely, relying instead on enhanced chemical senses. The trilobite body plan proved remarkably adaptable, radiating into every available marine niche. Their abundance and their hard, preservable parts make trilobites the timekeepers of the Paleozoic era. Geologists use specific trilobite species to date rock layers with remarkable precision, their evolutionary changes marking the passage of geological time like the hands of a clock. The appearance of a particular trilobite species might narrow a rock layer's age to within 1 million years, an eye blink in the context of Earth's vast history. At their evolutionary peak during the Ordovician period, trilobites had diversified into over 20, species, ranging from filter feeders that sieved microscopic food from the water column, to predators that crushed small prey with specialized appendages, to detritivores that processed organic matter in the sediment. Some burrowed beneath the seafloor for protection, others swam freely in the water column, still others clung to rocky outcrops where currents brought food to their waiting appendages. Yet for all their success, trilobites would face challenges that would gradually reduce their numbers. The Ordovician Silurian extinction event, one of the big 5 mass extinctions in Earth's history, eliminated many trilobite lineages, particularly the larger, more specialized forms. The survivors were generally smaller, more generalized species that could adapt to changing conditions. As the Paleozoic era progressed, new predators emerged with more sophisticated hunting strategies and more powerful weapons. Eurypterids, massive sea scorpions that could reach lengths of over 6 feet, possessed crushing claws capable of breaching even well-armored trilobites. Primitive fish developed jaws and teeth that could crack exoskeletons. The evolutionary arms race had escalated beyond what trilobite armor could withstand. By the Devonian period, approximately 419 to 359 million years ago, trilobite diversity had declined significantly. The final blow came with the Permian-Triassic extinction event around 252 million years ago, the most severe mass extinction in Earth's history, which eliminated over 95% of marine species. Among the casualties were the last remaining trilobite species, bringing an end to one of the most successful evolutionary lineages ever to inhabit Earth's oceans. Yet their legacy persists. The arthropod body plan, segmented, with jointed appendages and an exoskeleton, proven so effective by trilobites, would go on to become Earth's most successful animal design. Today's insects, crustaceans, and arachnids all share this fundamental architecture, modified and refined for countless ecological niches. When we hold a trilobite fossil today, among the most commonly collected of all fossils, we hold evidence of life's resilience and adaptability. These ancient seafloor dwellers, with their crystalline eyes and segmented armor, their defensive enrolling and their metachronal leg movements, represent not an evolutionary dead end, but a profound success story, a template for animal design so effective that variations on it still dominate our planet's biodiversity. In the grander story of life before dinosaurs, trilobites remind us that success is not measured merely in survival to the present day, but in the ability to thrive within one's moment in Earth's history, to solve the problems of existence so effectively that millions of generations might pass before circumstances finally change beyond adaptation's reach. In the shallow waters of what would one day become China's Yunnan province, something miraculous happened. The Cambrian seas, already teeming with strange arthropods and bizarre experimental body plans, witnessed the quiet debut of a revolutionary design. Beneath the rippling surface, translucent creatures no longer than your thumb flickered through patches of sunlight. Hycoichthys and Miloconmingia, our earliest known vertebrate ancestors. These diminutive swimmers might seem unremarkable at first glance. Their slender bodies, tapering to delicate tails, moved with gentle undulations through forests of algae and sponges. But hidden within these humble forms lay an innovation that would change the course of animal life forever: the notochord. This flexible rod of cartilage running along their backs provided the first true internal structural support, a primitive backbone that would eventually give rise to every vertebral column that followed. Imagine drifting alongside these ghostly pioneers some 525 million years ago. The water is warm, visibility exceptional in these clear, shallow seas. Schools of Hycoichthys dart between stromatolite mounds, their translucent bodies revealing shadowy internal structures. Their eyes are simple dark spots, their mouths nothing more than circular openings, but already they possess the fundamental architecture that links them to us: a dorsal nerve cord, paired eyes, a brain case, and most crucially, those distinct blocks of muscle tissue arranged in segments along their nascent backbones. The miracle of preservation at Chengjiang and other fossil sites has revealed these creatures in astonishing detail. We can see the impression of delicate gills, between 5 and 9 pairs, opening along their throats. These respiratory structures extracted oxygen from the water with unprecedented efficiency, fueling higher metabolic rates and enabling more active lifestyles than their invertebrate neighbors could manage. With this increased energy came the potential for sustained swimming, for hunting, for exploration. What's particularly haunting about these early vertebrates is how familiar yet alien they appear. They possess no true bones. Their skeletons were formed entirely of cartilage, like modern hagfish and lampreys. They had no paired fins for precise maneuvering, no jaws for active predation. Instead, they likely drifted with currents, filtering microscopic food particles from the water or gently vacuuming detritus from the seafloor with their simple, circular mouths. Yet within these humble beginnings lay the blueprint for everything that would follow. Each time your heart beats, each time your spine flexes, each time your eyes track movement, you're expressing ancient genetic instructions first encoded in creatures like Hycoichthys. The basic body plan established in these early vertebrates, head, spine, tail, bilateral symmetry, segmented muscles, persists through 500 million years of evolution to reach us today. The world these creatures inhabited was fundamentally different from our own. Oxygen levels were lower, the continents arranged in unfamiliar configurations. The Cambrian seas were experiencing an unprecedented explosion of animal diversity, the famous Cambrian explosion, with new body plans and ecological niches appearing at a rate never seen before or since. Among this riot of evolutionary experimentation, our vertebrate ancestors represented just one modest lineage, their future dominance impossible to predict. For millions of years, these small, translucent fish-like creatures remained marginal players in the oceanic theater. They neither dominated their ecosystems nor revolutionized marine food webs. They simply persisted, generation after generation, their basic design gradually refined through natural selection. Their descendants would eventually develop true bone, paired fins, and eventually those game-changing structures, jaws. But for now, they lived quiet lives in the shadow of more numerous and diverse invertebrates like trilobites and anemalocarids. As we watch them flicker through ancient Cambrian waters, these ghost-like swimmers connect us to a profound truth. The most transformative innovations often begin as humble adaptations with no grand destiny apparent. The notochord that would eventually give rise to every shark's cartilaginous skeleton, every frog's flexible spine, every bird's hollow vertebrae, and every human's upright posture started as nothing more than a flexible rod, helping tiny filter feeders move more efficiently through primordial seas. In every vertebrate heartbeat that followed, from the thundering pulse of blue whales to the rapid flutter of hummingbird hearts to the steady rhythm in your own chest, echoes the legacy of Hykuichthys and its kin. These pioneers carry within their simple forms the first verses of a genetic song that continues to play through the bodies of countless vertebrate species today. In the deepening twilight of Devonian seas, something massive moves against the current. A broad, armored head nearly 2 meters wide cuts through the water, propelled by powerful fins. This is Dunkleosteus, titan of the placoderms, and its hunting. The beast's eyes, set wide in its flattened skull, scan methodically for movement. When it spots a sluggish fish, there is no chase, only acceleration, a flash of movement, and then a sound unlike anything heard before in Earth's oceans. The metallic clack of the world's first true jaws snapping shut. The Devonian period, spanning from 419 to 359 million years ago, earned its nickname the Age of Fishes, for good reason. This was when vertebrate evolution truly found its rhythm, diversifying into countless forms. But no group exemplified this aquatic renaissance more dramatically than the placoderms, the first vertebrates to develop armored plates and, most critically, hinged jaws capable of crushing, slicing, and seizing prey. Dunkleosteus torelli represents the apex of placoderm engineering. Unlike modern fish with their flexible, many-bone jaws, Dunkleosteus possessed something far more primitive yet devastatingly effective. Its skull and jawbones were fused into solid plates of living armor. The edges of these bony plates didn't just meet, they overlapped, creating self-sharpening blades that maintained their killing edge through a lifetime of use. As the creature grew, these plates thickened, reaching up to 2 inches of solid bone in the largest specimens. What made this arrangement revolutionary wasn't just its offensive capability, but its mechanical efficiency. The jaw structure operated like carefully designed kinetic sculpture, with 4 major plates articulating in precise sequence. When the jaw opened, the skull roof actually lifted slightly. When it closed, the momentum-generated force estimated at over 0 pounds per square inch at the tip, enough to slice through the armor plating of any contemporary fish. For the first time in evolutionary history, a vertebrate could actively hunt prey its own size or larger. Beneath those formidable head shields, Dunkleosteus concealed another innovation, the beginnings of a complex brain case. While smaller than what we'd see in later fish, this protected neural housing allowed for more sophisticated sensory processing, likely including primitive depth perception, pressure sensitivity, and perhaps even rudimentary color vision. These enhanced senses, coupled with those devastating jaws, transformed placoderms from simple swimmers to calculated hunters. The waters they dominated were unlike today's oceans. Vast coral reefs, different in composition from modern varieties, stretched across shallow continental seas. Oxygen levels fluctuated dramatically, with some layers of water potentially becoming anoxic, completely devoid of dissolved oxygen, forcing predators and prey alike to navigate these invisible boundaries. The first substantial forests were appearing on land, their runoff changing the chemistry of coastal waters and creating new ecological niches. For nearly 70 million years, placoderms like Dunkleosteus rewrote marine food webs across the planet. Their hunting efficiency created new selective pressures, driving the evolution of faster prey fish, better camouflage, and defensive adaptations. Some placoderm species developed specialized dentition for crushing shellfish. Others evolved bizarre, elongated forms for ambush hunting in reeds. The family diversified into over 300 known species, ranging from dinner plate-sized bottom feeders to car-sized apex predators. But even as they reached the height of their dominance, the first shadows of decline were appearing. Newer fish designs, the early sharks and ray-finned fishes, were evolving more efficient swimming methods. While placoderms relied primarily on lateral undulation, pushing their armored bodies side to side through water, these newcomers developed more sophisticated fin configurations and lighter skeletons. What the placoderms gained in protection, they sacrificed in maneuverability and speed. By the late Devonian, environmental pressures intensified. A series of extinction events, possibly triggered by changing ocean chemistry and fluctuating sea levels, struck marine ecosystems globally. Reef systems collapsed, taking with them the complex food webs that supported the largest placoderms. Species began disappearing, first the specialists, then even the generalists. The armored hunters that had dominated for millions of years found themselves outcompeted by more energy-efficient designs. The final placoderms vanished at the Devonian Carboniferous boundary, approximately 359 million years ago. Their extinction marked the end of Earth's first experiment with jawed vertebrates, but not the end of their evolutionary influence. The basic jaw mechanisms they pioneered would be refined in sharks, bony fishes, and eventually reach land in the first tetrapods. Today, whenever a wolf seizes its prey or a human chews their food, they're employing variations of the same fundamental technology first developed by these armored fish. What makes the placoderm story so poignant is how thoroughly they succeeded before their decline. These weren't transitional curiosities that briefly appeared in the fossil record. They were fully realized, supremely adapted predators who dominated global oceans for longer than humans have existed. Their armored heads have been found on every continent, testament to a design that worked brilliantly within the parameters of its time. In the end, Dunkleosteus and its kin remind us that evolutionary success is always contextual, always temporary. The very adaptations that made them unstoppable in the Devonian, their heavy armor, their specialized jaw structures, their metabolic requirements, became liabilities when conditions changed. Yet their fundamental innovation, the kinetic miracle of hinged jaws, proved so advantageous that it persists in virtually every vertebrate lineage that followed. The placoderms themselves may be gone, but each time we speak, smile, or swallow, we echo their ancient influence on our body's design. As the sun sets over a Silurian estuary 420 million years ago, brackish waters shimmer with the day's last light. Tall stands of primitive horsetail reeds cast lengthening shadows across tidal flats. Then, disturbing the silty bottom with each step, something emerges from deeper channels. Pterygotus, the sea scorpion. 3 meters of segmented exoskeleton and compound eyes, its paddle-like limbs propelling it through shallow waters with deliberate grace. These eurypterids, as paleontologists call them, were neither true scorpions nor strictly marine creatures, but something altogether more primeval. They belonged to the chelicerates, relatives of modern spiders and horseshoe crabs, and for a brief geological moment, they grew to sizes that seem impossible for arthropods by today's standards. Pterygotus, among the largest, could reach lengths exceeding that of a tall human, with front appendages that extended even further when outstretched. What makes these creatures particularly haunting is how familiar, yet alien they appear. Their bodies followed the arthropod blueprint we recognize from modern crabs and insects: segmented exoskeletons, jointed limbs, compound eyes, but scaled to dimensions that would be metabolically impossible in today's atmosphere. Their carapaces were living armor, lightweight yet durable, molted periodically as they grew. Each segment interlocked perfectly with its neighbors, creating a sealed yet flexible exterior that protected vulnerable tissues while allowing remarkable freedom of movement. The most fearsome feature of Pterygotus was undoubtedly its chelicerae, specialized front appendages that functioned as grasping, crushing weapons. These weren't the pinching claws of modern lobsters, but rather serrated, knife-like structures that could deploy with astonishing speed. Biomechanical studies suggest their strike velocity rivaled that of modern mantis shrimp, generating localized pressure waves that could stun prey even before physical contact. When the strike connected, the interlocking teeth could easily pierce the armor of smaller arthropods or the scales of primitive fish. Moving through their estuarine habitat, these sea scorpions embodied contradictions. Despite their intimidating size, they were likely ambush predators rather than active pursuers, conserving energy between opportunistic strikes. Their compound eyes provided nearly 360-degree vision but probably delivered a pixelated, motion-sensitive view rather than sharp images. Their bodies were armored fortresses, yet they remained vulnerable during molting, when they shed their protective exoskeletons to grow. The world they inhabited was transitional in multiple senses. The Silurian period witnessed dramatic fluctuations in sea levels and climate, creating and destroying shallow marine habitats in rapid succession. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere were rising, enabling larger terrestrial arthropods. The first vascular plants were colonizing shorelines, their primitive root systems beginning the slow process of soil formation. Land wasn't yet dominated by vertebrates. That transformation lay millions of years in the future, but the stage was being set for one of life's great transitions. For Eurypterids, this changing world presented both opportunities and challenges. The fluctuating salinity of estuarine environments demanded sophisticated osmoregulation, the ability to maintain internal salt balance despite external changes. Evidence suggests that some species could transition between fresh and brackish waters, perhaps following prey or seeking protected breeding grounds. This adaptability allowed them to exploit ecological niches unavailable to strictly marine creatures. Yet the same environmental fluidity that created opportunities also generated competitive pressures. As jawed fish diversified, they brought new hunting strategies and higher metabolic rates to shared habitats. The primitive forests developing on land changed runoff patterns and sediment composition in coastal waters. Competing arthropod lineages, early crustaceans and the ancestors of modern horseshoe crabs, were developing their own specializations for similar ecological roles. The decline of Eurypterids wasn't sudden but gradual, playing out across millions of years. Some lineages adapted by becoming more specialized, transitioning toward fully terrestrial habitats or exploiting deep water environments. Others simply became smaller, abandoning the gigantism that had once been their hallmark. By the Permian period, approximately 250 million years ago, the last Eurypterids had disappeared, leaving only their fossilized impressions in ancient mudstones and limestones. What makes their story particularly compelling is how it challenges our assumptions about evolutionary trajectories. These were not primitive, inefficient creatures destined to be replaced by superior designs. They were superbly adapted apex predators who dominated their ecosystems for over 100 million years, far longer than our own species has existed. Their eventual replacement came not because their body plan was inherently flawed, but because changing conditions favored different adaptations. In the silent rocks where their fossils now rest, the sea scorpions remind us that evolution has no predetermined direction, no inevitable progression toward current forms. For a time, arthropod gigantism represented an extraordinarily successful strategy, one that might have continued indefinitely had conditions remained favorable. Instead, their legacy lives on in the more modest dimensions of modern chelicerates, the horseshoe crabs, spiders, and scorpions that inherited their fundamental body architecture, if not their imposing scale. In the transparent waters of an inland Silurian sea, sunlight penetrates to considerable depth, illuminating an otherworldly landscape. This is not the sandy-bottomed, coral-dominated seascape familiar to modern divers. Instead, vast limestone platforms stretch to the horizon, their surfaces transformed into intricate architecture by the planet's first true reef-building organisms. Welcome to Earth's original marine metropolis, constructed not of concrete and steel, but of calcium carbonate and organic tissue. The dominant builders of these submarine cathedrals were tabulate and rugose corals, ancient cousins to modern coral species, but following different structural blueprints. Unlike today's coral reefs, built primarily by scleractinian corals with their hexagonal symmetry, these Paleozoic predecessors constructed their colonies with fourfold or sixfold symmetry. Their calcium carbonate skeletons formed honeycomb-like structures, thousands of tiny chambers where individual polyps lived, their tentacles extending into passing currents to capture microscopic meals. Tabulate corals created massive, table-like formations with vertical tubes housing each polyp. Rugose corals, sometimes called horn corals, often grew as solitary structures resembling twisted cones. Together, they engineered complex three-dimensional spaces, overhangs, crevices, tunnels, and chambers that provided habitat for countless other marine organisms. Their growth was painfully slow by human standards, measured in millimeters per year, yet their collective construction over millennia created structures that rivaled modern coral reefs in complexity, if not in diversity. Swaying above these calcium foundations, attached to any available hard surface, crinoids added another dimension to the seascape. These sea lilies were not plants but animals, echinoderms related to modern starfish and sea urchins. Their flower-like feeding structures, supported on flexible stalks that could reach several meters in height, formed undulating forests above the reef proper. Each blossom consisted of articulated arms surrounding a central mouth, the arms lined with tiny tube feet that captured passing plankton and organic particles. From a distance, a Silurian crinoid garden resembled nothing so much as a submerged ballroom, their calcite-reinforced stems and arms catching and refracting sunlight like crystalline chandeliers. When feeding currents swept across the reef, thousands of these filter feeders would orient in unison, their arms extended to maximize food capture, creating the impression of dancers frozen mid-movement. At night, or when predators approached, these same arms would coil protectively around their central discs, the flowers closing until danger passed. The limestone architecture created by corals and the vertical dimension added by crinoids together formed the Silurian reef ecosystem's physical foundation. Within this framework thrived a complex community of organisms, each occupying specific niches. Brachiopods, shelled filter feeders superficially resembling mollusks but belonging to an entirely different phylum, attached themselves to hard surfaces in the gentler currents. Bryozoans, colonial animals forming encrusting mats or delicate branching structures, spread across available substrate. Trilobites scavenged along the reef floor, while eurypterids and early fish patrolled the waters above. As daylight faded into twilight, this submarine cathedral underwent a transformation. Diurnal feeders retracted into protective shells and crevices, while nocturnal hunters emerged from hiding places. Nautiloids, distant ancestors of modern octopuses and squids, but housed in external chambered shells, propelled themselves through darkening waters using jet propulsion. Their tentacles explored crevices, seeking out prey that had seemed safely hidden. Early fish, still lacking the powerful jaws of later species, nonetheless found ample feeding opportunities among the invertebrates active after dark. What made these ancient reefs particularly remarkable was their role as innovation centers for evolutionary adaptation. The complex three-dimensional environment, with its countless microhabitats, created selective pressures favoring specialization. Predators developed more sophisticated hunting strategies. Prey species countered with better defensive adaptations. Filter feeders evolved more efficient capture mechanisms. Mobile species developed improved navigation capabilities. The reef wasn't merely a physical structure but an evolutionary crucible, accelerating the pace of adaptation. The fossil record preserves these reef communities with extraordinary fidelity in certain locations. When ancient seas retreated or local conditions changed rapidly, entire reef ecosystems were sometimes preserved intact, capturing a moment in Paleozoic marine history. In these fossil assemblages, we can still see the spatial relationships between different organisms, the density of different populations, even occasional glimpses of predator-prey interactions frozen in time. Though different in composition from modern coral reefs, these ancient limestone cathedrals served many of the same ecological functions, creating habitat complexity, providing refuge for juvenile organisms, concentrating nutrients in otherwise nutrient-poor waters, and protecting coastlines from erosion. They represented one of Earth's first experiments with ecosystem engineering on a grand scale, where the physical structures created by living organisms fundamentally altered their environment and created new opportunities for other species. In the slow, silent accumulation of calcium carbonate skeletons, in the patient construction of mineralized stems and chambers, these ancient reef builders demonstrated the transformative power of time. Their individual contributions, microscopic layers of mineral, tiny extensions of living tissue, accumulated over millions of years into structures that changed the course of marine evolution and shaped the very geography of ancient coastlines. The surface waters of an Ordovician ocean, some 450 million years ago, appear strangely textured even from a distance. Drawing closer, This texture resolves into countless dark shapes suspended in the upper water column, not solid masses but delicate, branching colonies that resemble submerged, saw blades, or serrated leaves. These are graptolites, among the most enigmatic and ubiquitous organisms of the early Paleozoic seas, their ink-black outlines drifting with currents in vast, interconnected forests. Graptolites occupied an unusual evolutionary position. They were colonial animals belonging to the hemichordates, a phylum that shares characteristics with both invertebrates and primitive chordates. Each colony began from a single founding individual that budded asexually to produce dozens or hundreds of cloned zooids, all living within an interconnected structure called a rhabdosome. These zooids, tiny tentacled filter feeders, extended from protective tubes arranged in precise geometric patterns along the colony's branches. The architectural diversity of these floating colonies was remarkable. Some species constructed single rows of feeding tubes, creating straight or gently curved structures resembling combs. Others developed double rows, their zooids arranged in mirror image pairs. The most complex forms branched repeatedly, creating intricate networks that maximize surface area for feeding while maintaining structural integrity. Despite their delicate appearance, these colonies were surprisingly resilient, their organic structures reinforced with proteins that gave them flexibility without fragility. What made graptolites particularly successful was their mastery of the planktonic lifestyle. By maintaining neutral buoyancy in surface waters, they positioned themselves precisely where photosynthetic algae, their primary food source, were most abundant. They didn't need to expend energy swimming or maintaining position. Instead, they drifted passively, their feeding structures optimized to filter microscopic nutrients from the water flowing past. This energy-efficient strategy allowed them to thrive even in nutrient-poor regions of ancient oceans. The preservation of graptolites represents one of paleontology's most fortunate circumstances. Their bodies contained collagen-like proteins that, upon death and burial, transformed into carbon films with extraordinary resistance to degradation. While most soft-bodied organisms disappeared from the fossil record without trace, graptolites were preserved as carbon-black silhouettes against lighter sedimentary rock. Their distinctive outlines remain so clear that individual zooid tubes can often be counted, allowing for precise species identification even in specimens hundreds of millions of years old. This exceptional preservation has made graptolites invaluable as biostratigraphic markers, organic clocks that help geologists determine the relative age of rock formations. Different graptolite species evolved and went extinct in rapid succession throughout the Ordovician and Silurian periods, creating distinctive assemblages that can be recognized worldwide. A particular species might have existed for just 1 million years, a mere moment in geological time, before being replaced by descendant forms. By identifying these species in rock layers, scientists can correlate formations across continents with remarkable precision. Life for these drifting colonies followed seasonal rhythms dictated by oceanic currents and algal blooms. During productive periods, when microscopic algae flourished in surface waters, graptolite colonies grew rapidly, adding new branches and zooids. When nutrients became scarce, growth slowed, and colonies might release sexual reproductive structures to create new, genetically diverse founder individuals. These reproductive phases ensured genetic variability, while the asexual budding of zooids allowed successful genetic combinations to be replicated efficiently within each colony. The world these planktonic forests inhabited was undergoing profound transitions. The Ordovician period saw continents still gathered largely in southern latitudes, with vast open oceans covering much of the planet. Climate fluctuated dramatically, with ice ages alternating with warming periods. The atmosphere contained higher carbon dioxide levels than today, but lower oxygen concentrations. Land remained largely barren of complex life, making the oceans the primary theater for evolutionary innovation. Within these ancient seas, graptolites weren't merely passive participants, but active ecosystem engineers. Their colonies created microhabitats for smaller organisms that sheltered among their branches. When colonies died and sank to the seafloor, their accumulated remains altered sediment chemistry and provided food for benthic scavengers. In areas where graptolites were particularly abundant, Their decomposing bodies could even create oxygen-depleted zones in bottom waters, influencing which other organisms could survive there. What makes these ancient drifters particularly poignant is how their sleepy silhouettes have become such powerful tools for understanding Earth's history. By mapping the distribution of graptolite species in rock formations worldwide, geologists have reconstructed ancient ocean currents, tracked the movement of continental plates, and identified periods of global extinction and recovery. These humble colonial organisms, which spent their lives passively filtering micronutrients from Ordovician seas, now allow us to read entire chapters of our planet's biography. Though graptolites declined dramatically after the Silurian period and disappeared entirely by the Carboniferous, their ecological role as planktonic filter feeders persists in modern oceans, filled by different organisms following similar strategies. Their legacy lives on both in the rock record, where their carbon-black impressions continue to help us navigate Earth's timeline, and in the fundamental patterns of marine ecology they helped establish nearly 500 million years ago. In the warm, shallow seas of the Middle Devonian, some 380 million years ago, a quiet revolution was unfolding beneath the waves. The world's waters had long been dominated by creatures whose inner frameworks were formed of flexible cartilage, the same material that gives your ear its bendable shape. But now, in these ancient oceans, something remarkable was happening. Calcium and phosphate were beginning to infiltrate these pliant supports, hardening them, transforming them into true bone. Imagine floating in those primordial waters, suspended in the gentle current as schools of early bony fish, the osteichthyes, glide past you. Their bodies catch the dappled sunlight filtering through the surface, revealing scales that overlap like tiny shields of armor. Unlike their cartilaginous cousins who came before, these pioneers carried within them the architectural innovation that would eventually support everything from the massive frame of the blue whale to the delicate bones in your inner ear. Among these early bone bearers was Eusthenopteron, a predator roughly the size of a salmon, with something rather special happening at the ends of its fins. If you could reach out and gently take one of its paired fins in your hand, you might notice something familiar, the beginnings of what we might cautiously call a wrist. Not quite the mobile joint you're using to scroll through this video, but the first hesitant exploration of a structure that would one day allow creatures to push against solid ground. Eusthenopteron wasn't walking, not even close, but as it navigated through underwater vegetation, those proto-wrists allowed a flexibility of movement that foreshadowed possibilities yet to come. Each time it flexed those fins to maneuver between stone and plant, it demonstrated the potential locked within its pioneering anatomy. But bones weren't the only innovation brewing in these Devonian waters. Within the bodies of these early fish, another adaptation was quietly developing, the swim bladder. This gas-filled sac, positioned just beneath the spine, allowed for buoyancy control, letting fish rise or sink with subtle adjustments rather than constant swimming. Like a balloon that could be partially inflated or deflated according to need, the swim bladder gave these ancient swimmers an energy-efficient way to hold their position in the water column. What's particularly fascinating is that this humble buoyancy organ would eventually evolve in some lineages into something entirely different: lungs. The same structure that helped fish float effortlessly would, in certain descendants, become the organ that draws oxygen directly from air. It's as if nature took a flotation device and repurposed it into a breathing apparatus, demonstrating once again that evolution often works with what's already available, finding new purposes for existing structures. In the quieter lagoons and estuaries of this ancient world, another sensory revolution was taking place. The eyes of these early bony fish were developing something unprecedented: color vision. Where earlier vertebrates likely perceived the world in varying shades of gray, these fish began to discern the rich palette of their underwater realm. Pigments within specialized cells could now capture different wavelengths of light, painting their perception with hues that might have helped them distinguish nutritious plants from toxic ones, or spot the flash of a potential mate among the swaying underwater vegetation. This visual acuity offered advantages beyond the immediate. It established the foundation for all vertebrate color vision that followed, eventually enabling your own eyes to distinguish between thousands of subtle shades. The next time you pause this video to admire a sunset or choose between differently colored garments, you're benefiting from adaptations that first appeared in these ancient fish. As the Devonian period progressed, some of these bony fish found themselves increasingly drawn to the margins of their watery world. In shallow, plant-rich environments near shorelines, certain lobe-finned fish began to spend more time. Perhaps they were pursuing prey that sheltered in the shallows, or escaping larger predators that couldn't follow into the restricted spaces near land. Whatever the initial motivation, these forays into ever shallower waters set the stage for what would become one of the most significant transitions in vertebrate history. With each generation that favored life in these boundary zones, subtle adaptations accumulated: stronger fin supports, more efficient air-breathing capabilities, eyes positioned to see above the water's surface. The story of bone is, in many ways, the story of possibility. As these internal frameworks hardened, they provided not just protection but potential for larger bodies, for more powerful muscles to attach to, for the support needed to eventually venture beyond the water's embrace. As you drift into sleep, imagine those ancient seas and the quiet biological alchemy that transformed flexible cartilage into rigid bone, creating the scaffolding upon which so much of vertebrate life would eventually be built. For now, though, we linger in those Devonian waters, watching the sun set over a world where no creature has yet taken a true step on land, but the foundations, quite literally, have been laid. The bones that will eventually carry their descendants onto shore are forming, strengthening, preparing for challenges not yet encountered. The first hesitant steps onto land are still in the future, but with each passing generation, that future draws nearer. The late Devonian period, roughly 375 million years ago, a muddy delta spreads before us, where a great river fans out into countless shallow channels before meeting the sea. The air is thick with humidity, carrying the earthy scent of decomposing plant matter and the mineral tang of silt. Unfamiliar ferns create dappled patterns of light and shadow along the water's edge. This transitional zone, neither fully aquatic nor truly terrestrial, is where one of evolution's most pivotal chapters unfolds. In the shallow water near the bank, something moves. At first glance, it might appear to be just another fish, its body covered in scales, its form tapering to a tail designed for propulsion through water. But look closer at this creature, Tiktaalik rosier, and you'll notice details that hint at a remarkable future. Its head is flattened, with eyes positioned on top rather than on the sides, an arrangement that allows it to submerge most of its body while still keeping watch above the water's surface. Unlike typical fish that must turn their entire bodies to look around, Tiktaalik possesses something revolutionary: a neck. This simple adaptation allows it to swivel its head independently, tracking the movement of both aquatic prey below and potential threats from above without betraying its position with unnecessary motion. But it's the fins that truly tell the story of what's happening here. Traditional fish fins are primarily supported by fin rays, thin, flexible structures that excel at generating propulsion through water but buckle under any significant weight. Tiktaalik's fins, however, contain something more substantial. Within them lie bones arranged in patterns that echo what we would recognize as shoulders, elbows, and, most tellingly, wrists. These fins can do something unprecedented. When Tiktaalik encounters an area too shallow for swimming, it doesn't become stranded like its ancestors might have. Instead, it plants those sturdy fins against the river bottom and props itself up, lifting its head above water level. It's not walking, not as we would understand it, but it's supporting its own weight outside the buoyant embrace of water, if only for moments at a time. Imagine watching from the ferny shore as Tiktaalik moves through the shallows. When swimming is practical, it undulates like any fish, its powerful tail propelling it forward. But as the water grows too shallow, it seamlessly transitions to this proto-crawling motion, using those weight-bearing fins to pull itself forward across the muddy substrate, perhaps pursuing small invertebrates or seeking deeper channels. This is no impulsive, evolutionary leap, but rather the culmination of incremental adaptations over millions of years. Tiktaalik's ancestors had been spending more and more time in shallower waters, where stronger fin supports offered advantages for maneuvering through plant-choked environments. With each generation, those fins became sturdier, more articulated, more capable of brief moments of support. The advantages of this lifestyle are numerous. The shallows offer refuge from larger aquatic predators. They teem with invertebrate prey that are easier to catch than fast-swimming fish. The boundary between water and air also provides access to insects that might fall onto the water's surface, a protein-rich food source unavailable to creatures confined to deeper waters. If we could observe Tiktaalik more closely, we might notice another subtle but significant adaptation: its ribs. Unlike the ribs of purely aquatic vertebrates, Tiktaaliks are expanded, overlapping, creating a more rigid trunk. This stiffened body helps distribute weight when not fully supported by water, another small step toward the body plan that would eventually allow vertebrates to conquer land. Tiktaalik itself never fully left the water. It remained primarily aquatic, returning to deeper channels when threatened or when hunting required it. But with each generation that favored these shallow water adaptations, the boundary between aquatic and terrestrial existence grew more permeable. The legacy of creatures like Tiktaalik surrounds us even now. The bones in your arms, from shoulder to fingertip, follow the same fundamental pattern established in these transitional forms. When you reach for something, you're employing an anatomical arrangement first explored by creatures that never intended to leave water behind completely. Perhaps most poignantly, Tiktaalik and its relatives existed in a liminal state, not yet committed to the terrestrial path that some of their descendants would take, yet no longer fully bound to the aquatic realm of their ancestors. They inhabited the in-between, that transitional space where evolutionary innovation so often occurs. As the Devonian period progressed, environmental pressures continued to favor adaptations for brief terrestrial excursions. The ability to traverse short stretches of land between water bodies provided access to untapped resources and escape routes from aquatic predators. What began as an occasional necessity for survival gradually transformed into a new way of life. The muddy banks still hold no footprints, not yet. Tiktaalik's movements would have left only indistinct impressions, erased by the next high water or rainfall. But the promise of those footprints whispers in every prop of its unusual fins. With each generation, the time spent supported against gravity increased slightly. The ability to extract oxygen from air improved incrementally. The skeletal supports grew incrementally stronger. As you drift towards sleep, picture that ancient delta, the dappled light playing across waters that hide creatures poised at the threshold of a new world. They don't know it, but their descendants will one day run across open plains, climb towering trees, and eventually construct the very device on which you're watching this video. But for now, there is only the quiet experimentation of fins that sometimes press against mud, of bodies briefly feeling the full weight of themselves outside water's supportive embrace, of life testing the boundaries that have confined it to the seas for hundreds of millions of years. 300 million years ago, the world is transformed. We've entered the Carboniferous period, and the land that once hosted only the tentative explorations of early amphibians now supports vast, steaming swamp forests, stretching horizon to horizon. The air you breathe here would feel strangely invigorating. Oxygen levels have climbed to perhaps 35% compared to our familiar 21%. This hypercharged atmosphere is about to enable something extraordinary. Listen carefully to the sounds of this ancient swamp. Beneath the constant drip of condensation from overhead leaves and the occasional splash of an amphibian slipping into dark waters, there's another sound, a gentle, persistent rustling, like rainfall on dry leaves, but rhythmic, purposeful. Follow this sound, and you'll discover one of the most astonishing creatures ever to crawl upon Earth's surface. There, moving along what appears to be a well-worn pathway between towering tree ferns, is Arthropleura, a millipede of impossible proportions. Stretching over 2 meters in length and as wide as your thigh, this arthropod giant navigates the forest floor with the deliberate precision of its smaller modern relatives. Each of its many legs moves in coordinated waves, creating that distinctive shuffling sound as hundreds of tiny footfalls compress the debris beneath it. Arthropleura's segmented exoskeleton gleams slightly in patches of sunlight that manage to penetrate the dense canopy. Unlike modern millipedes that typically present in shades of brown or black, these swamp giants might have displayed more varied coloration, perhaps mottled patterns that helped them blend with the dappled forest floor, or even warning colors to advertise their formidable size to potential predators. What enabled such impossible growth? The answer lies partly in that oxygen-rich atmosphere surrounding us. Arthropods like millipedes don't breathe through lungs, but instead rely on a network of tiny tubes called tracheae that deliver oxygen directly to their tissues. This system becomes less efficient as body size increases. There's a reason modern insects and their relatives remain relatively small. But in this carboniferous world, with oxygen so abundant, those respiratory limitations have relaxed. The tracheae can deliver sufficient oxygen even to the deepest tissues of these enormous arthropod bodies. As Arthropleura moves through the swamp, it serves as a living highway for smaller organisms. Mites, primitive insects, and other tiny arthropods might hitch rides on its segmented back, creating a mobile ecosystem that travels through the forest. Some may be parasites, others merely opportunistic travelers, but all benefit from association with this gentle giant. For all its intimidating size, Arthropleura was no predator. Analysis of fossil jaw structures suggests these creatures were primarily detritivores, nature's recyclers, feeding on fallen plant material, accumulating on the swamp floor. As they consumed rotting vegetation, they contributed to what would eventually become one of Earth's most valuable resources: coal. The carboniferous forests we're witnessing will eventually be compressed into the fossil fuel deposits that powered the Industrial Revolution some 300 million years later. Imagine following one of these millipede highways through the swamp. The paths created by generations of Arthropleura provide relatively clear passages through otherwise challenging terrain. Fallen logs the size of modern buildings lie across muddy ground, their decay slowed by the waterlogged conditions. Some have become impromptu bridges, and as we watch, our giant millipede ascends one such log with surprising agility, hundreds of legs finding purchase on the decaying bark. From this elevated position, we can better appreciate the scale of these swamp forests. The trees surrounding us aren't the oaks or maples familiar to our modern eyes. These are the alien spires of lycopsids, horsetails, and primitive conifers, plants more closely related to mosses and ferns than to modern trees. They soar upward, creating a cathedral-like space beneath their strange, scale-patterned trunks. As our millipede descends from its log bridge, it encounters a particularly dense patch of fallen leaves and branches. Here, its ecological role becomes clear. With methodical movements, it begins to shred this material, its powerful mandibles reducing large plant matter into smaller pieces. This isn't merely feeding, it's processing. By breaking down these plant materials, Arthropleura accelerates decomposition, allowing fungi and bacteria to more efficiently convert dead plant matter back into nutrients. In this way, these giant millipedes serve as engineers in a planet-wide compost system. The rich black soil forming beneath the constant rain of plant debris owes much of its character to their tireless work. Without creatures like Arthropleura processing fallen vegetation, the carbon locked in these plants might accumulate indefinitely, eventually smothering new growth. As the day progresses, our millipede seeks shelter beneath an overhanging fern bank. Though they have few predators capable of threatening creatures of their size, Arthropleura still exhibit the cautious behaviors of their smaller relatives, preferring protected spaces when at rest. Here, partially concealed, it may remain for hours, its metabolism slowing as it digests its fibrous meal. The legacy of these quiet giants extends beyond their role in coal formation. The pathways they created through dense undergrowth may have served as the first animal-made roads used by other creatures to navigate the challenging swamp terrain. The soil they helped create supported increasingly complex plant communities. And perhaps most significantly, they demonstrated the upper limits of terrestrial arthropod size, a ceiling that would never again be reached after oxygen levels declined from their carboniferous peak. As night falls over the swamp, our Arthropleura remains in its shelter, a living reminder that familiar creatures in unfamiliar sizes can seem alien indeed. These gentle recyclers, these architects of soil, these titans of a hyperoxic world, remind us that Earth has hosted forms of life far stranger than anything we might imagine. And as you drift towards sleep, perhaps you'll dream of following millipede highways through ancient forests, guided by creatures that turned fallen leaves into the fuel of future civilizations. The late afternoon sun slants through the Carboniferous forest, casting long shadows across a small clearing. A pool of still water reflects the towering vegetation surrounding it, the surface occasionally dimpled by the subtle movements of small amphibians coming up for air. But it's not these early tetrapods that command our attention now. It's what hovers above them, suspended in that golden, oxygen-rich air. Meganeura, a dragonfly of impossible proportions, hangs almost motionless above the water. Its wingspan stretches an astonishing 70 centimeters across, wider than your outstretched arms from fingertip to fingertip. Sunlight filters through those wings, creating patterns on the water below like stained glass in some primeval cathedral. The thin membrane between its wing veins is possibly tinted with subtle amber and gold hues, though we can only speculate based on its modern descendants. Each wing is a masterpiece of natural engineering, a network of veins providing both structural support and delivering oxygen throughout the wing tissue. Unlike the opaque, scaled wings of butterflies that would evolve millions of years later, Meganeura's wings are transparent, their strength coming not from thickness but from their precisely arranged framework of supporting veins. As we observe longer, the massive dragonfly begins to move, its four wings operating independently in the complex flight pattern characteristic of its kind. Modern dragonflies are already aerial acrobats of unparalleled skill, capable of hovering, flying backward, and executing turns that would tear apart aircraft of human design. Meganeura likely possessed all these abilities, though perhaps its massive size imposed certain limitations, the square cube law suggesting it might have sacrificed some maneuverability for sheer wingspan. With several powerful wing beats, Meganeura accelerates suddenly, rocketing across the clearing with startling speed. Its target becomes apparent, a smaller flying insect, perhaps an early relative of modern mayflies, has ventured too far from cover. The hunt is brief and decisive. Meganeura's legs, armed with spines and bristles, form a perfect basket that snatches the prey from midair. Without landing, the giant dragonfly begins to consume its meal, those powerful mandibles making quick work of its unfortunate victim. The success of predators like Meganeura depended on the same atmospheric conditions that enabled Arthropleura's enormous size. The tracheal breathing system of insects, essentially a network of tubes that deliver oxygen directly to tissues, becomes less efficient as body size increases. In our modern atmosphere, this respiratory limitation helps explain why you'll never encounter insects approaching even a fraction of Meganeura's dimensions. But in the oxygen-saturated air of the Carboniferous, those constraints relax significantly. After finishing its meal, our giant dragonfly returns to hovering above the pool, its compound eyes scanning both the water below and the air around it. Those eyes, composed of thousands of individual facets, likely provided nearly 360-degree vision, making Meganeura an exceptionally efficient predator. Nothing moving within its visual field would escape notice. This aerial supremacy represented something unprecedented in Earth's history. While vertebrates were still largely confined to water or the immediate shoreline, insects had mastered flight, claiming the skies as their domain. For millions of years, creatures like Meganeura would rule this aerial realm unchallenged by vertebrate competitors. Birds, bats, and pterosaurs all lay in the distant future. As the sun dips lower, Meganeura's behavior changes subtly. It begins to patrol more actively along the water's edge, occasionally dipping the tip of its abdomen to touch the surface. This is a female, laying eggs in the protective environment of the pool. Her offspring will begin life as aquatic nymphs, fearsome predators in their own right, though confined to water until their final metamorphosis grants them wings. The life cycle of these giant insects connected aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems in ways that continue with their modern descendants. The nymphs would control populations of small aquatic organisms, while the adults regulated flying insect numbers. This ecological role, transferring energy and nutrients between water and land, remains one of the dragonfly's most important contributions to ecosystem function. As darkness begins to fall, our Meganeura seeks a perch high in the branches of a tree fern. Unlike some insects that can remain active through the night, dragonflies are visual hunters, dependent on sunlight. Here, gripping the frond with its strong legs, it will remain until morning light once again illuminates its hunting grounds. The reign of these aerial giants would eventually come to an end. As oxygen levels gradually declined from their carboniferous peak, the respiratory limitations of the tracheal system reasserted themselves. Subsequent generations of dragonflies became progressively smaller, eventually reaching the more modest dimensions of their modern representatives. Today's largest dragonflies, with wingspans of perhaps 19 centimeters, are impressive but pale shadows of their ancient relatives. Yet something of Meganeura persists beyond its direct descendants. The elegance of dragonfly flight, its efficiency, maneuverability, and precision, has inspired human engineering. From helicopter design to aerial drones, we continue to learn from these ancient masters of the air. The lightweight strength of their wing structure informs material science. The visual processing capabilities that allow dragonflies to track and intercept prey guide developments in artificial intelligence for autonomous vehicles. As you drift towards sleep, imagine those vast wings catching the last golden light of a carboniferous evening, translucent membranes glowing like amber glass. These delicate giants, with their stained glass wings and unparalleled aerial prowess, remind us that the boundaries of possibility shift with changing environmental conditions. What seems impossible in our world was once reality in Earth's distant past. Patrolling skies we would find simultaneously familiar and alien. The Permian night settles over a landscape transformed from the swampy expanses of the Carboniferous. The world has dried significantly. Continental drift has pulled land masses together toward what will eventually become the supercontinent Pangaea. The air, while still oxygen-rich by our standards, no longer maintains the extreme levels that supported the giant insects we've just left behind. Near a shrinking pond, surrounded by primitive conifers and seed ferns, something massive stirs. At first glance, it might appear to be a crocodilian, a low-slung body supported by 4 sturdy limbs, a broad head with powerful jaws. But look closer, and you'll realize you're observing something far more ancient, Eriops, one of the early amphibian colossi that dominated freshwater environments of this period. Measuring nearly 2 meters from snout to tail, Eriops dwarfs any modern amphibian. Its skin, likely moist but not slimy, may bear subtle patterns that help it blend with the mottled shadows of the shoreline. Its eyes, positioned on top of its skull, allow it to survey its surroundings while remaining mostly submerged, an adaptation shared with modern crocodilians that evolved independently through convergent evolution. As another Eriops approaches the water's edge, the first responds with a deep, resonant bellow that seems too voluminous to emerge from even such a large creature. The sound reverberates across the water, causing ripples to form on the otherwise still surface. This vocalization is made possible by specialized chambers within its skull, resonating cavities that amplify sound in ways reminiscent of, yet distinct from, the vocal adaptations of modern frogs. What we're witnessing is an ancient courtship ritual. The second Eriops responds with its own bellowing call, creating a duet that echoes through the night. These vocalizations serve multiple purposes, attracting mates certainly, but also establishing territory and warning potential competitors to keep their distance. Look closely at the side of Eriops' body, and you might notice a subtle line running along its flank. This is a sensory adaptation inherited from fish ancestors, the lateral line system. Like a primitive form of sonar, it allows the amphibian to detect pressure changes in the water, alerting it to the movement of potential prey or approaching predators even in complete darkness or murky conditions. As the larger Eriops slides into the pond, its movement reveals another fascinating aspect of early amphibian physiology. Unlike modern reptiles that use their rib cages to draw air into their lungs, Eriops employs a method called buccal pumping. It literally swallows air, using its throat muscles to force oxygen into simple but effective lungs. This method, still used by modern frogs and salamanders, works well enough on land but is particularly efficient during the many hours Eriops spends partially submerged. The amphibian now moves through the shallow water with surprising grace despite its bulk. Its powerful tail, a legacy of aquatic ancestors, provides propulsion while its splayed legs offer directional control. Though capable of terrestrial movement, Eriops is most at home in this intermediate zone, not fully committed to either aquatic or terrestrial existence. Near the pond's edge, partially hidden among emergent vegetation, clusters of jelly-like eggs cling to submerged plants. These are Eriops's offspring in their most vulnerable stage. Unlike the amniotic eggs that reptiles would later develop, with their protective membranes and water-conserving adaptations, amphibian eggs remain exposed to the environment, dependent on external moisture for survival. This reproductive strategy highlights both the liberation and limitation of early amphibians. They had escaped the water enough to exploit terrestrial food sources and avoid fully aquatic predators, yet remained tethered to moist environments for reproduction. Their skin, while tougher than that of modern amphibians, still served as a supplementary breathing surface and would desiccate in truly arid conditions. As the night deepens, more Eriops converge on the pond. Their movements stir up the muddy bottom, releasing nutrients that feed the simple aquatic plants growing there. In this way, these massive amphibians engineer their own environment, maintaining the productivity of their aquatic habitat through regular disturbance, a role similar to that played by hippopotamuses in some modern African ecosystems. The contrast between their vulnerable eggs and imposing adult forms speaks to the dramatic transformation that defines amphibian life. From delicate aquatic larvae, dependent on external gills and vulnerable to countless predators, they metamorphose into these formidable semi-terrestrial giants. It's a life history that bridges worlds, carrying within it the evolutionary history of vertebrate transition from water to land. Despite their impressive adaptations, creatures like Eriops represent an evolutionary experiment that would ultimately be outcompeted by their descendants. The coming Mesozoic era would see reptiles, with their water-conserving eggs and scales, push into drier habitats inaccessible to moisture-dependent amphibians. The ecological dominance of these early amphibian giants would fade, their massive forms never again replicated in their lineage. Yet something of their legacy persists in the night choruses of modern wetlands. When spring peepers and bullfrogs fill the evening air with their calls, they're participating in a tradition established by these ancient singers. The complex vocalizations, the waterside gatherings, the acoustic competition for mates, these behavioral patterns were pioneered by creatures like Eriops hundreds of millions of years ago. As you drift towards sleep, imagine those resonant calls echoing across a Permian pond, the water vibrating with each deep bellow. These amphibian giants, with their dual-purpose lives and impressive bulk, represent a pivotal chapter in the story of vertebrate evolution, not merely a transition between fish and reptiles, but successful pioneers in their own right, masters of an in-between world that they dominated for millions of years before the rise of the dinosaurs and their kin. Dawn breaks over the Carboniferous landscape. Mist rises from the warm, waterlogged soil, curling around the bases of towering trees unlike any found in our modern world. These aren't the familiar oaks, maples, or pines that dominate today's forests. These are lepidodendron, the scale trees, ancient relatives not of modern trees but of the humble club mosses that now grow as inconspicuous ground cover in moist woodlands. The scale tree before us stretches upward nearly 30 meters, its trunk straight as a pillar and patterned with distinctive diamond-shaped leaf scars that give it the appearance of reptile skin. This unusual texture isn't merely decorative, it represents the attachment points of leaves that have been shed as the tree grew taller, leaving behind a mathematical pattern that maximizes both support and photosynthetic surface during different life stages. Unlike modern trees that invest in extensive branching throughout their growth, lepidodendron maintains a relatively unbranched trunk for most of its life. Only upon reaching maturity does it develop a crown of Y-shaped bifurcations, each branch ending in clusters of strap-like leaves. This growth strategy, prioritizing height before spread, allows it to quickly reach the sunlight above the perpetually misty understory. What makes these giants even more remarkable is their bark. In modern trees, photosynthesis occurs primarily in the leaves, with bark serving mainly protective and transport functions. But the bark of lepidodendron contains chlorophyll, allowing it to photosynthesize across its entire surface. This adaptation maximizes energy capture in the diffuse light of these dense forests, where competition for sunlight is fierce. The scale tree's root system is equally unusual. Rather than the deep, branching roots of modern trees, lepidodendron is anchored by stigmaria, horizontal, shallow root structures that radiate outward like the spokes of a wheel. These roots are adapted for the waterlogged, oxygen-poor soils of the Carboniferous swamps, spreading widely rather than deeply to avoid drowning in the saturated ground. As the morning progresses and the mist begins to thin, we notice movement in the crown of a mature lepidodendron. The tree is releasing spores, millions upon millions of them, creating clouds that drift through the forest like golden smoke. Unlike the seeds that would evolve later in plant history, these are simple reproductive cells, each containing half the genetic material needed to grow a new scale tree. This reproductive strategy connects lepidodendron more closely to ferns and mosses than to the seed-bearing plants that would eventually dominate terrestrial ecosystems. The release of spores represents a massive investment of energy with minimal targeting, a strategy that trades precision for volume. Only a tiny fraction will find suitable conditions to germinate, but those few will be enough to maintain the species. As these spore clouds settle across the landscape, they contribute to another process central to the Carboniferous period, the formation of peat. The waterlogged conditions of these swamp forests slow decomposition dramatically. When lepidodendron and other plants die, rather than quickly returning their carbon to the atmosphere through decay, their remains accumulate in thick layers of partially decomposed plant matter. This peat represents concentrated solar energy, the captured sunlight of countless Carboniferous days, stored in carbon compounds that resisted decomposition. Given enough time and geological pressure, these peat deposits will transform into the coal seams that humans would eventually mine to fuel the Industrial Revolution. In this way, the forests we're observing are creating the energy reserves that will power steam engines and factories some 300 million years in their future. The understory beneath these towering scale trees hosts a diverse community of smaller plants, ferns with delicate, feathery fronds, primitive horsetails with jointed stems, and early seed ferns that represent an evolutionary transition between spore-bearing plants and true seed plants. This verdant undergrowth thrives in the high humidity and filtered light, creating multiple layers of vegetation that support diverse arthropod communities. As the day advances, clouds gather above the forest canopy. Rainfall in the Carboniferous was likely frequent and heavy, particularly in these coastal swamp environments. The precipitation nurtures the forest, but also contributes to the waterlogged conditions that both enable and constrain its growth. Too much water limits oxygen in the soil, restricting which plants can thrive here, yet also preserves fallen plant matter from complete decomposition. When rain begins to fall, it creates a symphony of sounds as it strikes the various plant surfaces, the hollow drumming on broad lepidodendron leaves, the softer patter among delicate ferns, the gentle splashing as drops reach the standing water below. The forest doesn't merely endure this rainfall, it is shaped by it, adapted to it, dependent upon it. Yet for all their apparent permanence, these scale tree forests existed in an ecosystem balanced on environmental conditions that would not last. As the Carboniferous period gave way to the drier Permian, continental drift continued to pull landmasses together, creating more inland areas isolated from the moderating influence of oceans. Climate patterns shifted, bringing seasonal dry periods that challenged the perpetually moist conditions these trees required. Equally significant, the evolution of more efficient seed plants, with their protected embryos and stored food reserves, offered advantages in colonizing drier habitats. These new competitors could establish themselves in environments where spore-bearing plants struggled, gradually pushing lepidodendron and its relatives into ever-shrinking ecological niches. The legacy of these scale trees extends far beyond their direct descendants, the modern club mosses that grow just centimeters tall. The coal deposits they formed would shape human history, powering the industrial transformations that created our modern world. The oxygen they helped accumulate in Earth's atmosphere enabled the evolution of larger animals, and the carbon they sequestered influenced global climate patterns for millions of years after their extinction. As evening approaches and you drift towards sleep, imagine standing at the base of these living columns, their diamond-patterned trunks stretching upward beyond sight, their shallow roots spreading beneath your feet. These forests of a distant past, with their alien architecture and unfamiliar growth patterns, remind us that Earth has hosted many versions of itself, each with dominant life forms perfectly adapted to conditions that would eventually change. The scale trees, those giants with reptile-patterned bark and golden spore clouds, thrived in their moment in Earth's history, before giving way to new forms, new adaptations, and new possibilities. The shallow waters of the Permian seas ripple with life, a hidden dance beneath the surface that few would notice unless they knew where to look. Spiraling through these ancient currents, creatures that seem both familiar and alien to our modern eyes navigate the blue expanse. These are the early ammonoids, distant ancestors of today's octopus and squid, yet housed within geometric shells of mesmerizing complexity. Their coiled homes catch the dappled sunlight as they propel themselves backward, a gentle pulsing motion that carries them through patches of floating algae. When threatened, a cloud of dark ink billows out behind them, a defense mechanism so effective it would remain virtually unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. The ink hangs suspended in the water like a phantom double, buying precious seconds for escape. What makes these spiral navigators truly remarkable, however, is hidden from casual observation. Inside those elegantly coiled shells lies an engineering marvel that predates human architecture by eons. Chamber after chamber, sealed off as the animal grows, each connected by a small tube called a siphuncle. Through this living pipeline, the ammonoid pumps in or releases gas, achieving a buoyancy control system so precise it would make modern submarine engineers nod in appreciation. The suture patterns where the internal walls meet the outer shell tell a story of increasing complexity. Early ammonoids display simple, wavy lines, but as we move through the Permian, these patterns develop into intricate, fractal-like designs. Each innovation allows for greater strength, deeper diving capabilities, and resistance to the crushing pressures of the ocean depths. Nature's first experiment in structural reinforcement plays out in calcium carbonate, invisible to all but the most determined observers. These creatures navigate without eyes that can perceive the distant horizon, without magnetic sensors we might recognize, yet they migrate across vast stretches of ancient oceans. Some paleontologists suggest they follow temperature gradients, others believe they sense minute chemical signatures in the water. Whatever method guides them, ammonoids move with purpose, traveling ancient highways of current that we can only reconstruct through careful study of their fossilized remains. When they die, their shells sink to the seafloor, sometimes accumulating in such numbers that entire limestone beds form from their remains. The spiral shape, so effective in life, becomes a perfect mold in death, preserving not just their existence but the evolutionary changes that flow through their lineage like the very currents they once navigated. And what a lineage it is! These early Permian pioneers represent just the beginning of an evolutionary success story that would span over 300 million years. Their descendants would survive the upcoming catastrophe that closes the Permian period, the most devastating extinction event Earth has ever witnessed. Later forms would diversify into thousands of species, some with shells coiled tight as pocket watches, others uncoiled like shepherd's crooks. The nautiloids, their close cousins, would persist even longer, sailing through the age of dinosaurs with barely a design change. And a single descendant, the modern nautilus, still drifts through today's tropical waters, a living fossil that would recognize its Permian ancestors, were they somehow to meet across the impossible gulf of time. As night falls on the Permian seas, the ammonoids continue their silent journeys, unaware that they represent one of life's great experiments in persistence. They are neither the largest nor the most fearsome creatures of their time, but in their quiet way, they have mastered the medium of water. Their story reminds us that survival doesn't always favor the strong or the swift, but sometimes the elegantly efficient, the mathematically perfect, the creatures that find their particular niche and refine it across millions of years of patient adaptation. In the gentle pulse of their movement, in the perfect spiral of their shells, we glimpse a world where time moves differently, where success is measured not in moments but in eons, where the lungs of the sea breathe to rhythms we can barely comprehend. The crimson light of late afternoon paints the Permian landscape in shades of rust and amber. Dust hangs in the air, catching the slanting sunlight like suspended gold. Through the heat-shimmering distance, a silhouette appears, unmistakable, otherworldly, yet strangely familiar. A tall sail rises from the spine of a creature, moving with deliberate purpose across the baked earth. This is Dimetrodon, neither dinosaur nor lizard, but something altogether different, a synapsid, an early experiment in the lineage that will one day lead to mammals. The sail that defines its silhouette stretches nearly 2 feet high on the largest individuals, supported by elongated neural spines connected by a membrane of skin rich with blood vessels. As the morning sun rises, Dimetrodon positions itself perpendicular to the warming rays, allowing blood to heat quickly in the sail before circulating it throughout its body. When midday heat threatens to overwhelm, it turns parallel to the sun's path, minimizing exposure. This living weather vane, this biological solar panel, represents one of evolution's first sophisticated attempts at temperature regulation. But there is more to Dimetrodon than its sail. Its skull houses something revolutionary: differentiated teeth. Where earlier vertebrates displayed rows of nearly identical pointed teeth, Dimetrodon's mouth contains specialized implements, large, serrated canines at the front for puncturing and gripping, followed by smaller teeth for slicing. Most distinctive are the notched cheek teeth that work like primitive shearing blades, allowing for more efficient processing of meat. This innovation in dental technology foreshadows the complex heterodont dentition that mammals would later perfect. Dimetrodon is not alone in this landscape. The Pelycosaur guild, the broader group to which it belongs, includes several variations on the sail-backed theme. Smaller Edaphosaurus, herbivorous rather than carnivorous, sports a sail adorned with crossbars like a strange organic radio antenna. Meanwhile, Sphenacodon stalks the undergrowth with only a modest ridge along its back, suggesting the sail is just one evolutionary response among many possible adaptations. As the day progresses, we might glimpse a group of Dimetrodon converging on a carcass, raising questions about their social structure. Did these creatures hunt in coordinated packs like some modern predators, or were they solitary hunters that merely tolerated each other at kills? The fossil record preserves their bones but not their behaviors, leaving paleontologists to extrapolate from bone beds, trackways, and comparative anatomy. The largest Dimetrodon could reach nearly 10 feet in length, with males typically outgrowing females. Their powerful legs sprawl somewhat to the sides in a semi-upright posture, not fully splayed like a crocodile, but not tucked under the body like a mammal. This intermediate stance represents a transitional phase in locomotion, one step in a journey toward the more energy-efficient gait that mammals would later adopt. When Dimetrodon hunts, it moves with surprising speed for its ungainly appearance. Its stride leaves distinctive footprints that paleontologists have traced through ancient mudflats now turned to stone. It might pursue primitive amphibians along shorelines or ambush smaller pelycosaurs from the meager shade of seed fern groves. With a bite force substantial enough to crush bone, once Dimetrodon secures its prey, the struggle ends quickly. The success of Dimetrodon and its relatives spans millions of years, their fossils primarily found in what is now North America and Europe, regions that during the Permian formed part of the supercontinent Pangaea. Their adaptations allowed them to thrive in environments ranging from seasonal floodplains to upland regions, demonstrating a versatility that helped secure their evolutionary foothold. Perhaps most importantly, these sailback predators represent a crucial chapter in our own distant ancestry. They are not reptiles, though they're often mistakenly depicted as such. Rather, they belong to the synapsid lineage, distinguished by a particular arrangement of skull openings that would eventually give rise to therapsids, cynodonts, and ultimately, mammals. When you look at Dimetrodon, you're not seeing a failed evolutionary branch or a strange reptilian offshoot, but rather an early draft of characteristics that would, with significant modification, eventually lead to ourselves. As twilight deepens across the Permian landscape, Dimetrodon's sail becomes a dramatic cutout against the dying light. In that moment, it embodies a peculiar truth about evolution, that features which evolve for one purpose often serve as the foundation for entirely different functions later. The metabolic experiments happening in these sail-backed creatures represent early steps toward the warm-blooded physiology that would one day define mammals, including humans. The Permian night falls, stars emerging in a sky that would look familiar yet subtly different to our eyes. Dimetrodon settles into the lingering warmth of a sun-baked depression in the earth, its sail radiating accumulated heat into the cooling air. Tomorrow, it will rise again, a living weather vane turning to catch the morning sun, continuing an ancient cycle in a world still millions of years away from dinosaurs, still hundreds of millions of years away from humankind, yet connected to our present by an unbroken thread of adaptation, inheritance, and the relentless persistence of life. Across the dusty floodplains of the late Permian, where the air hangs heavy with heat and the scent of crushed vegetation, movement catches the eye. Not the darting, nervous motion of small creatures, but the deliberate, ponderous progress of living tanks. These are the Parasaurs, exemplified by the massive Scutosaurus, whose name aptly translates to shield lizard. Though not true lizards at all, these creatures represent one of nature's early experiments in heavily armored herbivores. The ground trembles slightly as a herd of Scutosaurus moves through a stand of Glossopteris trees, their broad leaves providing meager shade in this increasingly arid world. Each animal stretches nearly 10 feet in length, with bodies that seem disproportionately wide for their height, creating a low-slung, almost tortoise-like silhouette. Their skin presents a mosaic of thick, bony plates embedded in leathery hide, not quite the articulated armor of later ankylosaurs, but an effective defense nonetheless. Most striking are their heads, which appear almost comically small in proportion to their bodies until you notice the details. The skull is reinforced with bony protuberances, giving them a nobbled, almost grotesque appearance. Beneath this ornamentation lies a beaked mouth perfectly adapted for stripping tough vegetation. No teeth line the front of the jaw. Instead, a sharp keratin sheath forms a cutting edge that makes clean work of even the most fibrous plants. When Scutosaurus feeds, it does so methodically. The rear of its mouth houses peg-like teeth that grind vegetation with a side-to-side motion rather than the simple up-and-down chomp of more primitive herbivores. This chewing mechanism, combined with a capacious gut for fermentation, allows these creatures to process plant material that would be indigestible to many contemporaries. Their digestive system works in low gear, extracting maximum nutrition from minimal resources, an adaptation perfectly suited to the increasingly seasonal climate of the late Permian. The herd moves with purpose but without haste. Young Scutosaurus stay close to the center of the group, protected by the walls of adult bodies that surround them. Occasionally, one of the larger individuals raises its head, testing the air with flaring nostrils. They have reason for caution. Despite their formidable defenses, they are not without predators. In the distance, shadowy forms pace along the perimeter of the herd. These are Gorgonopsids, the terrible-eyed hunters that represent the most fearsome predators of this age. With saber-like canines and powerful bodies, they present a deadly threat even to creatures as well-armored as Scutosaurus. The relationship between Parasaur and Gorgonopsid exemplifies the ancient balance between predator and prey, a biological arms race playing out across millions of years of evolution. When threatened, the Parasaurs don't flee as one might expect. Their defense lies not in speed but in solidarity and armor. The herd contracts, adults forming a perimeter facing outward, presenting a nearly unbroken wall of armored hides to any attacker. A lone Gorgonopsid, despite its impressive dentition, would find little opportunity in such an arrangement. But a coordinated group might separate a young or weakened individual, turning the odds in their favor. The Parasaur's success as a group lies partly in their social structure. Evidence suggests they may have exhibited some degree of parental care, perhaps even defending communal nesting grounds. Their trackways, preserved in ancient mudstone, show regular patterns that hint at habitual migration routes, following seasonal water sources through landscapes growing ever more challenging as the Permian climate deteriorates. What makes these creatures particularly fascinating is their evolutionary position. Though they themselves would not survive the coming Permian-Triassic extinction event, they are distantly related to the ancestors of modern turtles. In the architecture of their skulls, the arrangement of certain bones, we find hints of the relationship, though plesiosaurs never developed true shells. They represent not a failed experiment, but one branch of a diverse family tree, some twigs of which continue to flourish today. As the Permian sun begins to set, the Scutosaurus herd settles near a shrinking waterhole. Their day of grazing has stripped the surrounding area of edible vegetation, meaning tomorrow they must move on. In this harsh world of increasing aridity, of dust storms and unpredictable rainfall, the plesiosaur's strategy of armored deliberation has proven remarkably effective. They are living testimony to the fact that evolution favors not just the swift or the fierce, but sometimes the steadfast creatures whose patient persistence and defensive adaptations allow them to withstand challenges that would overcome more fragile species. In the gathering darkness, the breathing of the herd creates a gentle rhythm, a living counterpoint to the occasional calls of nocturnal hunters. The shields of shadow rest, drawing strength from the earth, from each other, from adaptations honed across countless generations. Tomorrow will bring new challenges in this ancient world, but for now, in this moment, the strategy of armor and solidarity continues to serve them well, as it has for millions of years in a time before dinosaurs walked the earth. Moonlight bathes the Permian forest in silver, turning the red sandstone cliffs to shadowy ramparts against the star-filled sky. In this nocturnal landscape, movement flickers at the corner of vision, not the scurrying of ground dwellers, but something altogether more remarkable. A small form launches from a tall conifer, unfurling membranous wings that catch the air with a barely audible whisper. This is Coelurosaurus, one of Earth's first experiments with vertebrate flight, gliding through the night nearly 50 million years before the first pterosaurs would truly fly. At first glance, this creature might be mistaken for a lizard, with its slender body measuring just under 2 feet from snout to tail tip. But as it sails between tree trunks, the most striking feature becomes apparent: extended wings that stretch outward from its flanks. Unlike the wings of bats or birds that would evolve much later, these gliding surfaces represent one of evolution's most unusual anatomical innovations. They're supported not by modified limbs, but by elongated ribs or rib-like structures that extend outward from the body before curving back, creating a framework for the membranous skin stretched between them. When Coelurosaurus perches on a branch, these structures can fold back against its body, becoming nearly invisible. But when it launches into the air, they deploy like ancient hang glider wings, increasing its surface area dramatically and allowing controlled descent rather than simple falling. The animal can adjust the curvature of these membranes slightly, enabling it to maneuver around obstacles and target specific landing spots with surprising precision. This method of aerial locomotion represents a completely different evolutionary pathway than the one later followed by pterosaurs, birds, or bats. It's a remarkable example of convergent evolution, nature arriving at similar solutions to the challenge of aerial movement through entirely different anatomical means. The modern Draco lizard of Southeast Asia employs a strikingly similar strategy, using elongated ribs to support gliding membranes, though it evolved this adaptation completely independently, separated from Coelurosaurus by hundreds of millions of years. As our gliding pioneer navigates from tree to tree, we glimpse the ecological niche it occupies. These creatures are likely insectivores, hunting the abundant arthropods that flourish in the Permian forest canopy. Their ability to glide allows them to travel efficiently between feeding areas, escape ground-based predators, and perhaps even pursue flying insects by launching themselves into their flight paths from above, a hunting strategy that combines ambush tactics with aerial interception. The Permian forests they inhabit are unlike modern woodlands. Dominated by conifers, seed ferns, and primitive cycads, these forests lack the flowering plants that would transform terrestrial ecosystems much later. Yet despite the differences in flora, the canopy environment creates similar evolutionary pressures, favoring adaptations for climbing, jumping, and eventually gliding between trees separated by gaps too wide to leap across directly. When morning approaches, Coelurosauravus returns to its daytime retreat, perhaps a hollow in a dead tree or a crevice in the sandstone cliffs. Unlike many later gliding and flying vertebrates, there's no evidence these early aerial pioneers were particularly social. They likely lived solitary lives, coming together only briefly for mating, their gliding adaptations serving primarily individual survival rather than group coordination. What makes Coelurosauravus and its relatives particularly fascinating is how they represent life's persistent exploration of available ecological space. The air above the Permian landscape offered an untapped frontier, one that would eventually be conquered more completely by actively flying creatures. But in this early chapter of aerial adaptation, gliding represented an effective compromise, a method of aerial movement that required less specialized anatomy and less metabolic investment than true powered flight. The preserved fossils of these creatures show remarkable detail, including impressions of the gliding membranes themselves. From these ancient imprints, paleontologists have reconstructed not just the animal's appearance, but aspects of its lifestyle, habitat preferences, and evolutionary relationships. Each fossil represents an individual that lived, glided, hunted, and eventually died in a world unimaginably distant from our own, yet connected to our present by the unbroken chain of life's adaptations. As the night progresses, our gliding pioneer makes dozens of short aerial journeys, each one an affirmation of its evolutionary strategy. Between the ground and the true sky lies this intermediate zone, this ecological frontier where Coelurosauravus has found its niche. The adaptations that allow it to exploit this space arose through the same processes of mutation, selection, and inheritance that drive all evolutionary change. Yet the particular solution it represents would not be widely replicated in later eras. When true pterosaurs evolve in the Triassic period, their flight mechanism will follow a different blueprint entirely, with wing membranes supported by a single enormously elongated finger. Birds will later evolve flight feathers, and bats will stretch membranes between multiple elongated fingers. Each represents a successful but fundamentally different approach to the challenge of becoming airborne. Coelurosauravus shows us that evolution's workshop often produces multiple prototypes, not all of which will serve as templates for future designs. As dawn approaches and the eastern sky begins to lighten, our gliding pioneer makes one final journey back to its daytime shelter. In its graceful descent through the canopy, we witness not just an individual animal but a moment in life's ongoing experiment, a chapter in the story of how vertebrates first began to conquer the skies, long before the age of dinosaurs, in a world still taking shape under the ancient Permian moon. As twilight settles over the late Permian landscape, a small snout emerges cautiously from a burrow entrance. Whiskers twitch, testing the air for scents of predator or prey. Eyes, larger than those of contemporary reptiles, scan the surroundings with a gaze that suggests a more sophisticated processing of visual information. This is Thrinaxodon, a cynodont that represents one of evolution's most consequential experiments, a creature not yet mammal, but no longer quite reptile either. Barely 2 feet long from nose to tail tip, Thrinaxodon would be easy to overlook in a world still dominated by larger animals. Yet in this unassuming package lie innovations that will echo through hundreds of millions of years of subsequent evolution. As it emerges fully from its burrow, its gait immediately distinguishes it from the sprawling posture of typical reptiles. The limbs tuck more underneath the body, allowing for more efficient locomotion and suggesting changes in metabolism that would eventually lead to the mammalian condition. The burrow from which it emerges tells another part of the story. Unlike the simple retreats of many contemporaries, cynodont burrows show evidence of family groups, adults and juveniles, cohabiting in complex tunnel systems. In some fossil specimens, multiple individuals have been found curled together, suggesting behaviors that would have been advantageous in regulating body temperature during cold nights. This hints at an emerging warm-bloodedness, a physiological revolution still in progress. When Thrinaxodon breathes, it does so through a specialized structure that represents another critical innovation, the secondary palate. This bony shelf separates the nasal passage from the mouth cavity, allowing the animal to breathe while holding food in its mouth. It's a seemingly small adaptation with profound implications, enabling more efficient oxygen processing that would eventually support the higher metabolic demands of true mammals. Perhaps most tellingly, Thrinaxodon's skull houses a larger brain relative to its body size than earlier synapsids. The expanded brain case accommodates enhanced sensory processing, particularly for smell and hearing, crucial adaptations for a creature active during dawn and dusk hours when visual information might be limited. The eye sockets suggest larger eyes as well, beginning the trend toward the improved low-light vision that would become a mammalian hallmark. As our cynodont moves through the underbrush, its mouth opens slightly, revealing what might be its most revolutionary feature: differentiated teeth. Where earlier vertebrates displayed rows of nearly identical teeth, Thrinaxodon's mouth contains distinct types, incisors at the front for nipping, canines for piercing, and complex postcanine teeth with multiple cusps for processing food more thoroughly than any contemporary reptile could manage. This heterodont dentition allowed for more efficient extraction of nutrients, supporting the higher energy demands of an increasingly active lifestyle. The creature pauses, head raised, nostrils flaring. The whiskers framing its snout, inferred from nerve openings in the skull, represent another mammalian innovation, providing tactile information about the immediate environment. These sensory hairs, combined with enhanced smell and hearing, create a rich sensory picture of the world, allowing Thrinaxodon to hunt effectively even in low-light conditions. Not far from the burrow entrance, we might glimpse juveniles emerging under the watchful attention of an adult. This parental care, unprecedented in its degree among earlier vertebrates, represents a fundamental shift in reproductive strategy. Rather than producing many eggs with minimal subsequent investment, cynodonts appear to have begun the trend toward fewer offspring receiving extended care, a strategy that would reach its apex in mammals. When Thrinaxodon feeds, it does so with greater oral processing than its predecessors. Those complex teeth work in conjunction with specialized jaw muscles, evidenced by expanded attachment areas on the skull. This more thorough chewing breaks down food more completely before swallowing, extracting maximum nutrition to fuel a physiology that increasingly demands more energy than cold-blooded metabolism can efficiently provide. Fossil evidence suggests these creatures may have possessed hair, though perhaps not yet the full pelage of true mammals. This insulating covering would have served dual purposes: retaining body heat during cool periods, and, perhaps counterintuitively, protecting against overheating by shielding the skin from direct sun exposure. Combined with behavioral adaptations like burrowing, this emerging suite of thermoregulatory features allowed cynodonts to maintain more stable internal temperatures than their contemporaries. As night falls completely, our Thrinaxodon returns to its burrow, joining others of its kind in a shared chamber. In this intimate space, body heat accumulates, creating a microclimate warmer than the cooling world outside. This simple behavior, combined with emerging physiological adaptations, represents an energy conservation strategy that foreshadows the warm-blooded condition of later mammals. What makes these small creatures particularly significant is not just what they were, but what they would become. In the wake of the devastating Permian-Triassic extinction event that would soon reshape life on Earth, these unassuming animals and their descendants would survive while larger, seemingly more dominant groups perished. Their adaptations, enhanced senses, more efficient metabolism, sophisticated parental care, would prove advantageous in the restructured ecosystems of the Triassic. The cynodont story is, in many ways, our story. When we nurse our young, when we process food with our complex teeth, when we regulate our body temperature internally rather than through basking behaviors, we express traits whose origins can be traced back to these small, whiskered creatures of the late Permian. In Thrinaxodon's watchful gaze, in its protective care of offspring, in its increasingly mammalian physiology, we glimpse the distant foundations of our own existence, a reminder that even the most profound evolutionary transitions begin with modest adaptations in seemingly unremarkable creatures. As the Permian night deepens, stars wheel overhead. The same stars that shone down, when mammals were still just a promise encoded in the biology of these transitional forms. Our cynodont settles into its burrow, warm among its kind, an early chapter in a story that would continue unbroken to the present day. The story of how small, nocturnal creatures with specialized teeth, enhanced senses, and attentive parental care would eventually give rise to an extraordinary radiation of life forms, including, some 250 million years later, ourselves. The Permian sun beats down mercilessly on a landscape of increasing desolation. Dust devils swirl across hardened clay, spinning tales of an ecosystem under stress. Through the heat haze, shapes materialize, not the sails of predatory Dimetrodon, nor the armored bulk of Dinosaurs, but something different. A herd of Placerias, among the most successful of the Dicynodonts, moves with deliberate purpose toward one of the few remaining waterholes in this increasingly arid world. Reaching lengths of 10 feet and weighing up to a ton, these barrel-bodied herbivores dominate the landscape through sheer biomass rather than fearsome adaptations. Their most distinctive feature greets us immediately, a face that seems to combine elements of turtle and hippopotamus, with a prominent toothless beak formed of keratin. This specialized structure acts as a precision cutting tool, allowing Placerias to crop tough vegetation with remarkable efficiency. Below this beak, 2 tusks protrude downward from the upper jaw, not teeth in the conventional sense but modified canines, the sole remnants of what was once a full complement of teeth. In males, these tusks grow larger, suggesting their use in competition for mates or territory rather than feeding. The rest of the mouth contains no teeth at all, replaced by a horny covering similar to that of modern turtles, an early experiment in toothless herbivory that would be echoed millions of years later in different lineages. The herd moves with a semi-upright gait that distinguishes them from many contemporaries. Their legs position more directly under the body than the sprawling posture of typical reptiles, an adaptation that provides greater locomotor efficiency and weight support. This stance, combined with their barrel-shaped torsos, gives them a silhouette reminiscent of modern rhinoceros or hippopotamus, a case of convergent evolution where similar ecological niches produce similar body forms across vast spans of evolutionary time. When they reach the waterhole, tension becomes palpable. The shrinking water supply draws diverse creatures, creating temporary communities bound by shared necessity. Placerias uses its size and numbers for protection, the herd forming a defensive perimeter when gorgonopsid predators approach. The tusks that primarily evolved for intraspecific competition serve double duty as deterrents against all but the most determined attackers. The Dicynodonts' success in this harsh environment stems partly from their specialized digestive system. Like modern herbivorous mammals, they likely possessed expanded gut chambers where symbiotic microorganisms broke down tough plant fibers. This fermentation process would have extracted nutrition from vegetation too refractory for many contemporaries to process, giving them access to food sources with less competition. Across the supercontinent Pangaea, similar herds of Dicynodonts roam landscapes from what will one day become Scotland to Antarctica, from South Africa to China. Their fossils tell stories of remarkable adaptability, surviving in environments ranging from seasonal floodplains to upland regions, from temperate zones to areas of extreme aridity. This global distribution speaks to an evolutionary success story often overshadowed by the more dramatic sail-backed pelycosaurs or the saber-toothed gorgonopsids. Perhaps most telling are the mass death bone beds discovered by paleontologists, accumulations of dozens or even hundreds of Dicynodont skeletons preserved together. These grim tableaux record catastrophic die-offs during extreme drought conditions when entire herds perished around dwindling water sources. Yet, even these disasters highlight the Dicynodonts' success. Their populations were large enough to create such concentrated remains, suggesting they were among the most abundant large herbivores of their time. As afternoon fades toward evening, our Placeria's herd finishes drinking and moves away from the waterhole, seeking what meager vegetation remains in the vicinity. Their foraging patterns show evidence of careful selection, targeting plants with higher moisture content during drought conditions. This dietary flexibility, combined with specialized processing equipment in the form of their beaked mouths, allowed Dicynodonts to persist even as the Permian climate deteriorated. What makes these creatures particularly remarkable is their evolutionary resilience. While most of their contemporaries would perish in the upcoming Permian-Triassic extinction event, the most devastating mass extinction in Earth's history, some dicynodont lineages would survive into the Triassic period. These survivors would continue the dicynodont legacy for millions of years more, coexisting with early dinosaurs before finally disappearing in the late Triassic. As twilight approaches, the herd settles in a slight depression where the day's accumulated heat radiates from the ground. They cluster together, perhaps for protection, perhaps for social bonding that strengthened herd cohesion. Their tusked profiles silhouetted against the sunset create a scene both alien and strangely familiar, large herbivorous quadrupeds whose ecological role broadly parallels that of modern ungulates, despite being separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary divergence. The success of dicynodonts like Placerius offers a counterpoint to a common misconception about evolutionary history, that each successive group of animals simply replaces its predecessors in a straightforward progression. In reality, dicynodonts thrived alongside early archosaurs, the group that would eventually include dinosaurs, competing successfully for resources and habitat. Their decline came not from competitive inferiority but from a complex interplay of climate change, shifting continental configurations, and ecological restructuring following the Great Dying at the end of the Permian. As darkness falls across the ancient landscape, the breathing of the herd creates a gentle rhythm against the background sounds of the Permian night. These tusked survivors, these beaked herbivores, these evolutionary experiments continue their patient existence in a world increasingly defined by extremes. They are living testimony to life's resilience, to adaptation's power, to the quiet persistence that sometimes proves more enduring than specialized dominance. In the desert of fire that the late Permian becomes, the dicynodonts maintain their hold, their story continuing even as the curtain prepares to fall on the Paleozoic era. In the warm, shallow seas of the Middle Devonian, some 380 million years ago, a quiet revolution was unfolding beneath the waves. The world's waters had long been dominated by creatures whose inner frameworks were formed of flexible cartilage, the same material that gives your ear its bendable shape. But now, in these ancient oceans, something remarkable was happening. Calcium and phosphate were beginning to infiltrate these pliant supports, hardening them, transforming them into true bone. Imagine floating in those primordial waters, suspended in the gentle current as schools of early bony fish, the osteichthyes, glide past you. Their bodies catch the dappled sunlight filtering through the surface, revealing scales that overlap like tiny shields of armor. Unlike their cartilaginous cousins who came before, these pioneers carried within them the architectural innovation that would eventually support everything from the massive frame of the blue whale to the delicate bones in your inner ear. Among these early bone-bearers was Eusthenopteron, a predator roughly the size of a salmon, with something rather special happening at the ends of its fins. If you could reach out and gently take one of its paired fins in your hand, you might notice something familiar, the beginnings of what we might cautiously call a wrist. Not quite the mobile joint you're using to scroll through this video, but the first hesitant exploration of a structure that would one day allow creatures to push against solid ground. Eusthenopteron wasn't walking, not even close, but as it navigated through underwater vegetation, those proto-wrists allowed a flexibility of movement that foreshadowed possibilities yet to come. Each time it flexed those fins to maneuver between stone and plant, it demonstrated the potential locked within its pioneering anatomy. But bones weren't the only innovation brewing in these Devonian waters. Within the bodies of these early fish, another adaptation was quietly developing, the swim bladder. This gas-filled sac, positioned just beneath the spine, allowed for buoyancy control, letting fish rise or sink with subtle adjustments rather than constant swimming. Like a balloon that could be partially inflated or deflated according to need, the swim bladder gave these ancient swimmers an energy-efficient way to hold their position in the water column. What's particularly fascinating is that this humble buoyancy organ would eventually evolve in some lineages into something entirely different: lungs. The same structure that helped fish float effortlessly would, in certain descendants, become the organ that draws oxygen directly from air. It's as if nature took a flotation device and repurposed it into a breathing apparatus, demonstrating once again that evolution often works with what's already available, finding new purposes for existing structures. In the quieter lagoons and estuaries of this ancient world, another sensory revolution was taking place. The eyes of these early bony fish were developing something unprecedented: color vision. Where earlier vertebrates likely perceived the world in varying shades of gray, these fish began to discern the rich palette of their underwater realm. Pigments within specialized cells could now capture different wavelengths of light, painting their perception with hues that might have helped them distinguish nutritious plants from toxic ones, or spot the flash of a potential mate among the swaying underwater vegetation. This visual acuity offered advantages beyond the immediate. It established the foundation for all vertebrate color vision that followed, eventually enabling your own eyes to distinguish between thousands of subtle shades. The next time you pause this video to admire a sunset or choose between differently colored garments, you're benefiting from adaptations that first appeared in these ancient fish. As the Devonian period progressed, some of these bony fish found themselves increasingly drawn to the margins of their watery world. In shallow, plant-rich environments near shorelines, certain lobe-finned fish began to spend more time. Perhaps they were pursuing prey that sheltered in the shallows, or escaping larger predators that couldn't follow into the restricted spaces near land. Whatever the initial motivation, these forays into ever shallower waters set the stage for what would become one of the most significant transitions in vertebrate history. With each generation that favored life in these boundary zones, subtle adaptations accumulated: stronger fin supports, more efficient air-breathing capabilities, eyes positioned to see above the water's surface. The story of bone is, in many ways, the story of possibility. As these internal frameworks hardened, they provided not just protection but potential for larger bodies, for more powerful muscles to attach to, for the support needed to eventually venture beyond the water's embrace. As you drift into sleep, imagine those ancient seas and the quiet biological alchemy that transformed flexible cartilage into rigid bone, creating the scaffolding upon which so much of vertebrate life would eventually be built. For now, though, we linger in those Devonian waters, watching the sun set over a world where no creature has yet taken a true step on land, but the foundations, quite literally, have been laid. The bones that will eventually carry their descendants onto shore are forming, strengthening, preparing for challenges not yet encountered. The first hesitant steps onto land are still in the future, but with each passing generation, that future draws nearer. The closing acts of the Permian period unfold against a backdrop so altered, so fundamentally transformed, that it seems to belong to another Earth entirely. This is the prelude to Catastrophia, slow-motion disaster, playing out across tens of thousands of years, though in geological terms, it arrives with terrifying swiftness. In what will someday become Siberia, the Earth has begun to tear itself apart. Vast fissures open in the crust, releasing floods of basaltic lava across an area larger than modern Europe. This is not a single eruption, but thousands, perhaps millions, occurring in pulses over an extended period. The Siberian traps, as they will come to be known, represent one of the largest volcanic events in our planet's history. Above these eruptions, the sky gradually transforms. What begins as localized plumes of ash and gas eventually spreads, creating a persistent haze that dims the sun's light across the entire planet. The quality of light itself changes, filtered through particulates and compounds that have never before existed in such concentrations in Earth's atmosphere. Sunsets take on an alien quality, deep crimson, giving way to purple twilights that seem to last for hours. Carbon dioxide levels rise inexorably, driven by more than just the volcanic emissions. The intense heat from the lava flows begins to cook ancient coal seams and carbonates in the bedrock, releasing additional greenhouse gases. The warming climate triggers a cascade of secondary effects, each amplifying the one before. In the oceans, circulation patterns begin to change. Surface waters warm, while deeper waters stagnate. Gradually, dissolved oxygen levels drop, creating expanding dead zones where marine life suffocates in the depths. The normally blue waters take on a greenish hue in many regions as sulfur bacteria organisms that thrive in oxygen-poor conditions begin to dominate the microbial communities. the chemistry of the water itself transforms. As carbon dioxide dissolves into the oceans, carbonic acid forms, gradually lowering the pH of the entire marine system. For creatures with calcium carbonate shells or skeletons from microscopic foraminifera to ammonites and corallis, acidification represents an existential threat. Their protective structures begin to literally dissolve around them. Rivers carry this changing chemistry from the oceans inland. Once thriving freshwater ecosystems experience the same cascading failures. Even the mighty temnospondyl amphibians begin to decline as their breeding grounds become increasingly hostile to their delicate eggs and larvae. On land, the forests that once stretched across Pangaea suffer under the changing atmospheric conditions. Increased carbon dioxide initially stimulates plant growth, but as other pollutants accumulate and rainfall patterns shift dramatically, vast tracts of vegetation begin to die. Forest fires, once contained naturally, now spread unchecked across drought-stricken landscapes. Perhaps most insidious of all is what happens in the warming Arctic regions. Ancient deposits of methane, previously locked safely away in frozen soils and seafloor sediments, begin to thaw and bubble up into the atmosphere. Methane, a greenhouse gas many times more potent than carbon dioxide, accelerates the warming in a vicious feedback loop. The fossil record speaks to us across 252 million years, preserving evidence of this catastrophe in layers of sediment. We find a distinct boundary where suddenly the diversity of life plummets. Below this line exist thousands of species. Above it, a mere fraction remain. Marine ecosystems lose up to 96% of their species. On land, perhaps 70% of vertebrate families disappear forever. This is not a sudden impact like the asteroid that would later claim the dinosaurs. This is a long, drawn-out strangulation of Earth's biosphere systems, failing one after another as environmental thresholds are crossed. The magnitude is difficult to comprehend. In the oceans, entire ecological guilds vanish completely. The great coral reefs of the Permian, built not by modern corals but by their ecological predecessors, bleach and die. The trilobites, ancient arthropods that had survived through 3 previous mass extinctions over 300 million years, finally disappear entirely from Earth's oceans. In the coal swamps and forests, vast communities of plants and animals simply cease to exist. The strange sail-backed synapsids' distant mammalian ancestors like Dimetrodon fade away, along with many of the other dominant terrestrial animals. When the worst finally passes, Earth enters the Triassic period, a changed planet. The world has been ecologically reset, vast niches stand empty, and the survivors face an unprecedented opportunity. From this devastating bottleneck will emerge the ancestors of many modern groups, including the dinosaurs themselves. The Great Dying, as this extinction is sometimes called, represents both an ending and a beginning, a brutal punctuation mark between chapters of Earth's history. What follows is not merely recovery but reinvention, as life once again demonstrates its remarkable resilience in the face of catastrophe. The earliest Triassic dawn breaks over a landscape scarcely recognizable as Earth. Where dense forests once stood, only scattered vegetation remains, clinging to life in the most protected locations. The soil lies exposed, eroding under seasonal rains that carve new channels across the barren floodplains. The air itself feels different, oxygen levels have plummeted, making each breath less satisfying than it would have been in the world before. This is a wounded planet, still reeling from the greatest mass extinction in its history. Yet even here, in this desolate aftermath, life persists. Movement catches the eye near the edge of a muddy waterway, not the sinuous motion of the few surviving amphibians, but something more deliberate, more purposeful. A small herd of barrel-chested creatures emerges from the morning mist. Their bodies are stout and robust, supported by strong limbs positioned beneath them, rather than splayed to the sides like many of their extinct relatives. Their most distinctive feature is immediately apparent: a short, beaked face with 2 tusk-like teeth protruding downward from the upper jaw. These are Lystrosaurus, perhaps the most improbable survivors of the Permian catastrophe. They move with pig-like determination across the cracked mud, using their specialized beaks to root through the soil for tough roots, tubers, and the few resilient plants that have already begun to reclaim the landscape. These aren't magnificent predators or specialized wonders of evolution, they are survivors, generalists adapted to endure conditions that claimed so many others. What made Lystrosaurus successful when so many others perished? Their barrel chests offer one clue. These expanded rib cages housed larger lungs, an adaptation that proved critically valuable in the oxygen-poor atmosphere of the early Triassic. While other animals suffocated, Lystrosaurus could extract sufficient oxygen from each labored breath. Watch as one of the smaller individuals suddenly freezes, head raised. Something has disturbed it, perhaps one of the few predators that also survived the extinction. With surprising speed for its stocky build, the Lystrosaurus darts to a nearby depression in the ground and begins to dig with powerful forelimbs. Within minutes, it has disappeared beneath the surface. This burrowing ability represents another key to their survival. During the environmental upheavals of the extinction, the ability to retreat underground provided crucial shelter from temperature extremes, from atmospheric toxins, from the worst of the surface conditions. While forests burned and larger animals succumbed to the changing environment, Lystrosaurus could wait out the worst periods in the relative safety of their burrows. Perhaps most important was their unspecialized diet. Unlike creatures dependent on specific plants or prey that vanished in the extinction, Lystrosaurus could consume whatever hardy vegetation remained. This dietary flexibility allowed them to adapt to a world where food webs had collapsed and specific food sources could no longer be relied upon. The success of these seemingly unremarkable creatures was unprecedented. In the ecological vacuum following the extinction, Lystrosaurus didn't merely survive, they thrived. Fossil evidence suggests that they may have accounted for over 90% of vertebrate fossils in some early Triassic formations, spreading across Pangaea to inhabit territories that would eventually become parts of Africa, Asia, Antarctica, and possibly beyond. For a brief window in Earth's history, these tusked survivors became the planet's dominant land, vertebrates not through superior adaptations for a stable world, but through the perfect combination of traits for surviving an unstable one. They were the inheritors of empty niches, the pioneers that began the long process of ecological recovery. As the small herd continues its methodical foraging across the floodplain, they demonstrate an important evolutionary lesson. In times of catastrophic change, it is not always the most specialized or advanced forms that prevail. Sometimes, it is the generalists, the adaptable, the unexceptional who inherit the world. The descendants of Lystrosaurus would eventually diversify into many forms as the Triassic progressed, becoming part of increasingly complex ecosystems. Some would grow larger, others more specialized. They represent an important branch of the Dicynodont therapsids, distant relatives of our own mammalian lineage. As the morning advances and the mist burns away, revealing the stark landscape in full sunlight, the Lystrosaurus continue their patient work of survival. They are living testament to life's resilience, to its capacity to endure even the most extreme challenges and begin anew. In their unassuming presence lies the seed of recovery, the first chapter in Earth's next great evolutionary narrative. This is how worlds rebuild, not with sudden flourishing, but with the quiet persistence of the few who remained when all seemed lost. The Middle Triassic world has begun to heal. It bears little resemblance to the barren wasteland that marked the aftermath of the Permian extinction. Plants have returned to much of the landscape, though they differ from those that came before. The climate has stabilized somewhat, though it remains warmer and more arid than the world that preceded the catastrophe. New ecosystems are taking shape, filled with survivors and their increasingly diverse descendants. Among these emerging communities, a transformation is underway, one that will set the stage for the next 200 million years of terrestrial evolution. On the fringes of a seasonal stream cutting through what resembles an open savanna, movement catches the eye. A small, lithe reptile emerges from the cover of cycad-like plants, standing perhaps half a meter tall at the hip, with a body length of about a meter, including its tail. This is Euparkerion remarkable at first glance, but carrying within its form the blueprint for a revolution. Unlike the sprawling gait of many contemporary reptiles, Euparkeria moves with a different posture. Its limbs are positioned more directly beneath its body, particularly the hind limbs, which show the beginnings of what will eventually become a fully erect stance. This seemingly subtle shift in anatomy represents a profound change in locomotion efficiency. Each step conserves more energy, allowing for greater endurance and, when needed, impressive bursts of speed. Watch as it moves across the open ground with a peculiar gait knot, quite the full upright stride of later dinosaurs, but certainly not the belly-dragging crawl of more primitive reptiles. This is a transitional form, caught between old ways of moving and new. When it breaks into a run, the advantage becomes clear. It lifts its body fully from the ground, its long tail providing balance, as its surprisingly powerful hind limbs propel it forward. Euparkeria belongs to a group called the Archosauriforms, close relatives to the true archosaurs that will eventually include crocodilians, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. They share distinctive skull features, including an additional opening in the skull in front of the eye, the antorbital fenestra, that lightens the skull while providing space for jaw musculature, and, in some cases, air sacs connected to the respiratory system. But perhaps the most significant innovation lies hidden in a structure that might seem insignificant to the ankle. The archosaur ankle represents a mechanical redesign that allows for more efficient weight transfer and improved mobility. In Euparkeria, we can see an early version of this arrangement, with the astragalus and calcaneum bones beginning to form the distinctive crocodile normal configuration that will become one of the hallmarks of the archosaur lineage. This may seem a small detail, but in evolutionary terms, it represents a critical adaptation. The improved ankle allows for better weight support during locomotion, particularly when moving rapidly. Combined with the more upright posture, these changes transform the potential for active, sustained movement in ways that more sprawling reptiles cannot match. As the Euparkeria continues its patrol of the streamside territory, it demonstrates another archosaur characteristic, the capacity for active hunting. Unlike many reptiles that rely primarily on ambush, this animal actively pursues prey, using its speed and agility to chase down smaller animals. Its jaws are lined with serrated, slightly recurved teeth, suited for seizing and holding struggling prey. Euparkeria itself is not a direct ancestor to dinosaurs or crocodilians, but rather a cousin that reveals what the common ancestors of these groups might have looked like. It stands at an evolutionary crossroads, where the archosaur lineage is beginning to explore the possibilities that its new adaptations have opened. Around the world, relatives and ecological equivalents are emerging, each experimenting with variations on these fundamental innovations. Some are becoming more specialized as predators, others as herbivores. Some are growing larger, testing the limits of the new body plan, while others remain small and agile. The archosaur design proves remarkably versatile. In the coming millions of years, it will be modified into an astonishing array of forms from the crocodilian line that will retain many primitive features while becoming supremely adapted to semi-aquatic ambush predation, to the avemetatarsalia line that will give rise to pterosaurs and dinosaurs, including the birds that still fill our skies today. As Euparkeria disappears back into the vegetation, it leaves footprints in the damp soil near the stream, small impressions that might someday fossilize, preserving this moment in the Middle Triassic when the world was witnessing the rise of what would become Earth's next great ruling lineage. The stage is being set. The actors are taking their positions. The Triassic has begun its grand experiment with the archosaur bodyplane experiment that will ultimately reshape life on land and even return to conquer the skies and seas. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across a Triassic waterway, where the landscape reveals subtle changes from the scenes we've witnessed before. The recovery from extinction continues its steady march as ecosystems gain complexity with each passing million years. Here, where a broad, shallow river meanders through seasonally dry terrain, another evolutionary experiment unfolds. A group of reptiles moves with deliberate purpose toward the water's edge. They stand over a meter tall at the hip, their bodies sleek and muscular. But what immediately draws attention is the extraordinary structure rising from their backs, tall, sail-like crests supported by elongated neural spines from the vertebrae. As they reach the shallows, their reflections ripple across the surface, doubling the visual impact of their striking silhouettes against the crimson light of approaching dusk. These are Ctenosaurus scos, members of the Ctenosauricid family and part of the larger group called Poposauroid sarcosaurs experimenting with the body plan that will eventually lead to dinosaurs and their relatives. Their name, meaning comb lizard, references the most distinctive feature, that remarkable sail or crest running along their backs. The sail brings to mind earlier creatures like the synapsid Dimetrodon from before the Great Extinction, but this represents convergent, evolution-similar structures evolving independently in unrelated lineages. Where Dimetrodon belonged to the lineage that would eventually lead to mammals, Tenosauriscus stands firmly on the archosaur branch that will give rise to crocodilians, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. As the small group wades into the shallows, their purpose becomes clear: they are seeking relief from the heat of the day. The water laps against their legs and lower bodies while their sails remain prominently displayed above the surface. This scene fuels one of the great debates surrounding such structures. Did these sails primarily serve for thermoregulation, or were they primarily display features? The thermoregulation hypothesis suggests that these sails functioned much like a radiator. Blood vessels running through the thin skin stretched over the neural spines could be dilated to release excess heat when the animal was too warm, or constricted to conserve heat when temperatures dropped. By turning broadside to the morning sun, these animals could have warmed more quickly than their sailless counterparts. Yet the display hypothesis offers an equally compelling explanation. The dramatic silhouette created by the sail would have been immediately recognizable to others of their kind, potentially serving roles in species recognition, mate selection, or establishing dominance hierarchies. The positioning of the animals now, with their sails catching the reddish light of sunset while they cool their bodies in the water, certainly creates a striking visual display. Perhaps the truth incorporates both explanation structures that initially evolved for one purpose, often being co-opted for additional functions. Nature rarely wastes an opportunity to derive multiple benefits from a single adaptation. What makes Ctenosauricus and its relatives particularly significant is their timing and positioning in the archosaur family tree. They represent early experiments with body forms and adaptations that will later appear in modified forms in dinosaurs and other archosaur groups. Their semi-erect to erect posture, their increasingly efficient locomotion, their diverse diets all point toward the tremendous adaptive potential of the archosaur lineage. As these animals rest in the shallows, the world around them continues its own transformations on a much grander scale. The supercontinent Pangaea has begun its slow fragmentation. New seaways form as continental blocks drift apart, creating barriers that will gradually isolate populations and drive new evolutionary trajectories. Climate zones shift, rainfall patterns change, and novel ecological niches emerge in this dynamic landscape. These geological processes, imperceptible in the moment but profound over millions of years, create the stage upon which evolution performs its endless experiments. The breaking of Pangaea will eventually lead to the separation of Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south, with further fragmentations creating the continental arrangement we recognize today. For the archosaurs, including Ctenosauricus and its relatives, these changes represent both challenge and opportunity. Geographic isolation will drive speciation events, creating new variants adapted to local conditions. Novel ecosystems will provide testing grounds for different body plans and lifestyles. The sail-backed form we see here is just one of many evolutionary pathways being explored. As twilight deepens, the Ctenosauricus group moves back onto shore, water streaming from their bodies. Their distinctive silhouettes merge with the gathering shadows, but they leave behind not just footprints in the mud, but their place in the ongoing story of life on Earth, a story where sails may turn to crests, where body plans continue to evolve, and where the foundation is being laid for the age of dinosaurs still to come. Morning light filters through a thin canopy of seed ferns and conifers, creating dappled patterns across the forest floor of the Middle to Late Triassic. The ground cover is sparse ferns, horsetails, and early flowering plants, creating patches of green against the reddish soil. This transitional ecosystem, neither the coal swamps of the Carboniferous nor the diverse forests that will come later, provides the setting for another crucial chapter in the prelude to the dinosaur age. A sudden movement draws attention to a small form darting between patches of vegetation. No larger than a house cat, this creature moves with a distinctive gait primarily on its hind limbs, its body held horizontal while its long, stiffened tail provides counterbalance. This is Lagosuchus, or a close relative, one of the early dinosauromorphs that represent the first experiments with the fully bipedal locomotion that will become a hallmark of many dinosaur groups. Watch carefully as it pauses, balanced perfectly on its hind limbs, head cocked to track the movement of insects in the leaf litter. When it spots potential prey, it hops forward with remarkable agility, snatching beetles and other invertebrates with quick movements of its head and neck. Its forelimbs, noticeably smaller than its powerful hind limbs, occasionally assist in manipulating food or steadying itself against vegetation, but play little role in locomotion. The shift to bipedality represents one of the most significant transitions in vertebrate evolution. In Lagosuchus and its relatives, we see this adaptation in its early stages, already conferring advantages but not yet refined to the level seen in later dinosaurs. The hind limbs have begun to elongate, particularly in the metatarsals, the bones of the foot, creating a more efficient lever system for propulsion. The anatomy reveals other changes that facilitate this new way of moving. The hip socket has begun to open into a perforate acetabuluma, distinctive dinosauriform feature, that allows the femur to be tucked directly beneath the body, rather than projecting outward. The ankle has continued the modifications we observed in earlier archosaurs, with further refinements that improve weight transfer during bipedal locomotion. Perhaps most telling is the arrangement of muscle attachments along the tail and pelvis. The caudofemoralis muscles which connect the tail base to the femur have increased in importance, providing the primary propulsive force for the hind limbs. The stiffened tail, held horizontal by interlocking processes on the vertebrae, serves both as an attachment point for these muscles and as a counterbalance to the body mass forward of the hips. These adaptations did not appear spontaneously but represent the culmination of gradual changes occurring across millions of years in the archosaur lineage. What we witness in Lagosuchus is the integration of these modifications into a functional system that foreshadows the locomotor capabilities of theropod dinosaurs. As our small dinosauromorph continues its foraging, other animals move through the undergrowthsome, still using the more primitive quadrupedal locomotion, others experimenting with their own versions of bipedality. This is a time of evolutionary experimentation, with multiple lineages exploring the possibilities offered by the archosaur body plan. The advantages of bipedality in this context become apparent as we observe longer. The elevated head position provides better awareness of surroundings, detecting both potential prey and predators at greater distances. The freed forelimbs, though not yet extensively modified in these early forms, offer possibilities for manipulation that will be exploited more fully by their descendants. Perhaps most significantly, the biomechanical efficiency of bipedal locomotion allows for sustained activity levels that more sprawling quadrupeds struggle to match. What might seem like a minor shift in posture and locomotion represents a profound rewriting of predator hierarchies and ecological relationships. These small bipeds, with their enhanced mobility and activity levels, can exploit resources and survive in ways that create new evolutionary pathways. Though Lagosuchus itself is not a direct ancestor to dinosaurs, it and its close relatives show us what the earliest dinosauriforms animals just outside true dinosauria might have looked like. As the day progresses, our small dinosauromorph moves through its territory with the distinctive hopping gait that betrays its transitional nature, not yet the smooth bipedal stride of later theropods, but no longer the sprawling crawl of more basal reptiles. Each footprint it leaves in suitable substrate has the potential to become part of the fossil record, preserving this moment when the world stood at the threshold of a new evolutionary era. In these small shadows moving through the Triassic underbrush, we glimpse the future. Though they could not know it, these modest pioneers were establishing the blueprint for some of the most successful vertebrates ever to walk the earth. From such humble beginnings would emerge titans. Dawn mist clings to the ground in a late Triassic valley, where a seasonal river has created a strip of lush vegetation amid the otherwise semi-arid landscape. The first rays of sunlight pierce the thin fog, illuminating a scene that offers a glimpse of Earth's future. A small herd of relatively large reptiles moves methodically through a grove of cycads and primitive conifers, their most distinctive feature immediately apparent necks that stretch and sway with a grace that seems almost avian. These are plateosaurs and their close relatives, some of the earliest sauropodomorphs, the lineage that will eventually give rise to the truly massive sauropod dinosaurs like Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus. Though modest by comparison to their later descendants, these animals represent a significant size increase from the small bipeds we observed earlier. Standing 2 to 3 meters tall with their necks extended and measuring up to 8 meters from snout to tail tip, they command attention in this Triassic landscape. Their long necks sweep in gentle arcs as they browse vegetation at various heights. Unlike the truly gigantic sauropods that will follow, these early forms retain relatively small heads, with teeth adapted for slicing through tough plant material. They still possess the ability to rear up on their hind legs when necessary to reach higher food sources, a behavior that will be lost in their larger descendants as they commit fully to quadrupedal locomotion. The body plan reveals a fascinating transitional state. While moving primarily on all fours, their forelimbs remain somewhat shorter than their hind limbs, creating a sloped back profile rather than the more level profile of later sauropods. Their hands and feet still show distinct digits, not yet fused into the more columnar arrangements that will evolve to support the tremendous weight of their descendants. As one individual stretches its neck to reach a particularly appealing cycad frond, we can observe another critical adaptation that will become central to the sauropod success story, the beginning of an air sac system connected to the lungs. While not yet as extensive as in later dinosaurs, these early sauropodomorphs show evidence of air spaces invading the vertebrae, particularly in the neck region. This pneumatization both lightens the skeleton and improves respiratory efficiency, allowing for the longer necks that define this lineage. The posture of the limbs shows continued refinement of the dinosaurian stance. The legs are increasingly columnar, positioned directly beneath the body to support weight more efficiently. The ankle and foot structure has continued to evolve, with the main weight now carried on the inner toes while the outer toes are reduced, a trend that will continue in their descendants. As the morning progresses and the mist burns away, the feeding herd provides a tableau of evolutionary potential. Though still relatively modest in size compared to what will follow, these animals have crossed important thresholds in vertebrate evolution. They represent some of the first large-bodied herbivores to exploit the high-browsing niche, accessing plant resources that remain untouched by most contemporary herbivores. Their digestive systems have likely begun to adapt to process the fibrous plant material that forms their diet. While not yet possessing the complex digestive arrangements of later sauropods, these early forms probably relied on gut fermentation to break down cellulose, requiring large digestive chambers that contribute to their relatively barrel-shaped torsos. The success of this body plan is evident in the fossil record. Plateosaurs and their relatives achieved a near-global distribution during the late Triassic, with fossils found on most continents. They represent one of the first truly successful radiation events within the dinosauriform lineage, exploring the possibilities of large size and herbivory that will become defining features of many dinosaur groups. As we observe these graceful browsers, their necks creating living curves against the brightening sky, we can almost sense the evolutionary momentum building. The fundamental adaptations are in place: the efficient stance, the beginnings of respiratory innovations, the specializations for herbivory. What remains is time and opportunity for these features to be refined and expanded to their logical extremes. In these modest giants of the late Triassic, we see the shadow of the truly massive sauropods yet to come, creatures that will push the boundaries of terrestrial vertebrate size to limits never again approached. The template exists already, requiring only the right conditions to express its full potential. As the herd moves slowly along the river course, continuing their methodical browsing, they leave behind not just their distinctive three-toed footprints, but a profound legacy, beginning of the long-necked dynasty that will become one of the most iconic and successful adaptations in dinosaur evolution. Heavy clouds gather on the horizon as afternoon transitions toward evening in the late Triassic landscape. The air grows thick with humidity, carrying the electric anticipation of approaching rain. This is not merely another passing shower, but part of a greater climatic event, the Carnian pluvial episode, a period of increased rainfall and humidity that will play a crucial role in dinosaur ascendancy. Below the gathering clouds, a landscape in transition spreads before us. The rift valleys created by the ongoing breakup of Pangaea create a mosaic of environment uplands and lowlands, freshwater systems and seasonal floodplains. The vegetation has continued to diversify, with conifers, seed ferns, and cycads creating more complex forest structures than we've seen in earlier periods. The first heavy raindrops begin to fall, quickly intensifying into a subtropical downpour that transforms dry streambeds into rushing torrents. This increased precipitation is not a local phenomenon but a global climate shift occurring approximately 230 million years ago, lasting perhaps 2 million years, a brief moment in geological terms, but a critical turning point for life on Earth. In the suddenly water-rich environment, life responds with explosive diversification. The riverbanks and newly formed wetlands become meeting grounds for different evolutionary lineages, some continuing ancient traditions, others representing the vanguard of new approaches to survival. Near the water's edge, large temnospondyle amphibians, distant relatives of the giants we encountered earlier still, maintain their aquatic dominance, though their diversity has diminished since their heyday. They share this habitat with early crocodiliforms, which have begun to exploit the semi-aquatic ambush predator niche that their descendants will perfect over the coming millions of years. In the trees surrounding these waterways, another experiment unfolds. Small, active forms move through the branches with surprising agility. Some appear superficially lizard-like, but show distinct adaptations for an arboreal lifestyle. Among them are early pterosaurs, their wing membrane still relatively modest compared to their later relatives, but already providing the ability to glide between trees or make short-powered flights. These are the first vertebrates to truly conquer the air, preceding birds by many millions of years. On the ground below, a startling diversity of archosaurs moves through the underbrush and open areas. Some still maintain the quadrupedal stance of their ancestors, while others have fully committed to bipedality. Most significant are the increasing numbers of true dinosaurs still relatively small and modest, but beginning their ascent to ecological dominance. The intensifying rainfall that characterizes this Carnian pluvial episode does more than simply fill rivers and create temporary wetlands. It transforms entire ecosystems, altering patterns of plant growth and creating new niches that favor certain adaptations over others. The dinosaurs, with their efficient upright posture, their increasingly sophisticated respiratory systems, and their adaptability, find themselves particularly well positioned to exploit these changing conditions. As the downpour continues, the landscape transforms before our eyes. Dry gullies become flowing streams, floodplains fill with standing water, and formerly parched soil grows rich with new growth. This increased humidity and precipitation extends the range of environments where amphibians can reproduce successfully, while simultaneously creating new opportunities for the increasingly diverse reptile groups. What makes this period so pivotal is not simply the climatic shift, but its timing in relation to evolutionary developments. The various dinosauriform groups had already established the foundational adaptations: bipedality, improved respiration, more efficient locomotion that would define dinosaur success. The Carnian pluvial episode provided the environmental trigger that allowed these adaptations to demonstrate their full advantage. Fossil evidence from this period reveals a striking pattern. Below the geological layers associated with the Carnian pluvial episode, dinosaurs represent a minor component of terrestrial vertebrate communities, typically accounting for less than 20% of individuals. Above these layers, their representation increases dramatically, often exceeding 50%. This shift represents one of the most significant faunal turnovers in Earth's history. Yet this is not a simple tale of dinosaurian triumph over inferior competitors. Many factors contributed to this transition, including possible disease events affecting other archosaur lineages, changes in plant communities that favored certain feeding adaptations, and perhaps even chance events that eliminated some competitors while sparing the early dinosaurs. As evening approaches and the rain begins to ease, Leaving the landscape glistening in the last light of day, we stand witness to a world poised at a tipping point. The Archosaur experimentation we have followed through the Triassic has produced numerous viable forms, each successful in its own ecological context. Yet from this diversity, it will be the dinosaurs that emerge as the dominant terrestrial vertebrates for the next 165 million years. The true dinosaurs among these diverse archosaurs can be identified by specific anatomical features: the fully perforated hip socket, the distinctive arrangement of ankle bones, the modified hand and foot structure. Yet to contemporary eyes, they might not appear obviously superior to their close relatives. Their ultimate success would have been impossible to predict with certainty. This reminds us of a profound truth about evolutionary history, that success often depends not just on intrinsic adaptations, but on how those adaptations interact with changing environments, with chance events, with the complex web of ecological relationships. The dinosaurs did not triumph because they were inherently better than all alternatives, but because their particular set of adaptations proved especially advantageous in the specific conditions that followed the Carnian pluvial episode. As darkness falls and the rain-washed landscape settles into night, we have completed our journey through the prelude to the dinosaur age. From the amphibian giants of the Permian waterways, through the catastrophic extinction that reset Earth's ecological systems, to the diverse archosaur experiments of the Triassic, we have witnessed the gradual assembly of the anatomical, physiological, and ecological components that would define the Mesozoic world. The true age of dinosaurs still lies ahead, an era when these animals will diversify into an astonishing array of forms, from the immense sauropods to the fearsome theropods, from the armored thyreophorans to the horned ceratopsians. They will grow to tremendous sizes and shrink to bird-like proportions. They will conquer every terrestrial ecosystem and return to both water and air. Their 165 million year reign will reshape Earth and leave an indelible mark on evolutionary history. Yet in these modest beginnings, in the small bipedal forms darting through the underbrush, in the long-necked browsers stretching for cycad fronds, in the early experiments with feathers and flight, we find perhaps the most profound chapter of their story. For here, in the transition from what was to what would be, we glimpse the endless creativity of evolutionary processes and the remarkable ways in which life responds to opportunity and challenge. The cycles of rise and fall, of innovation and extinction, of adaptation and change, these are the eternal rhythms of Earth's history. The dinosaurs represent but one movement in this grand symphony, yet what a movement it was. As we contemplate their origins in these ancient Triassic landscapes, we cannot help but feel wonder at the intricate pathways that led from small, unassuming beginnings to some of the most magnificent creatures ever to walk the Earth. And though the dinosaurs themselves would eventually face their own extinction-making way for the age of mammals, and ultimately, for ourselves, their legacy continues in the birds that fill our skies, the sole survivors of this remarkable evolutionary journey. In this continuity, this unbroken thread connecting past to present, we find perhaps the most enduring wonder of all.